When Lena Cross whispered, "Please just make it fast," in that sterile hospital corridor at 2 a.m., she wasn't speaking to a doctor. The CEO of Cross Enterprises, the woman who'd built a tech empire from dormitory dreams, who'd stared down boardrooms full of wolves without flinching, was clutching her abdomen, blood seeping through her designer blouse, and the only person who'd heard her collapse was a man in a security uniform mopping floors 3 hallways away. Daniel Cole moved toward her not with the hurried panic of someone out of their depth, but with the terrifying calm of someone who'd seen worse. Much worse. As fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and her vision tunneled, Lena saw him roll up his sleeves. And there, stark against his skin, were tattoos she recognized from news footage of war zones, the caduceus and crossed rifles of a combat medic. Her last conscious thought before the pain consumed everything was a contradiction that made no sense. How does a decorated military medic end up as a night janitor? If you want to find out how a single night changed 3 lives forever, stay with me until the end. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these tales travel. The executive bathroom on the 42nd floor of Cross Enterprises Tower wasn't designed for emergencies. It was designed for power. All Italian marble, motion sensor faucets, and ambient lighting that made even exhaustion look distinguished. Lena Cross had chosen every detail herself 5 years ago, back when the company was still fighting for Series B funding, and she was still fighting to be taken seriously in rooms full of men twice her age. Now, at 29, she ruled those rooms. But power meant nothing when your appendix decided to rupture during the one night you'd stayed late to finalize the Singapore acquisition alone. The pain had started as a dull ache around 7 p.m., annoying but manageable. The kind of discomfort Lena had trained herself to compartmentalize alongside disappointment, exhaustion, and the persistent loneliness that came with being the youngest female CEO in the tech sector. She'd pushed through conference calls with Hong Kong and London, her hand occasionally drifting to her right side, pressing gently as if she could will the discomfort away through sheer determination. By 9 p.m., the ache had sharpened into something that made her breath catch. By 11, she was sweating through her silk blouse, her vision swimming as she tried to focus on acquisition documents that suddenly looked like they were written in a language she'd never learned. At 1:47 a.m., when the pain became a white-hot spike that dropped her to her knees in that beautiful bathroom, Lena finally admitted what her body had been screaming for hours. Something was catastrophically wrong. She'd managed to drag herself into the hallway, leaving a smear of blood on the marble she'd always kept immaculate. The executive floor was empty. Of course it was empty, because Lena Cross worked longer and harder than anyone, because that was what it took to stay on top, because letting anyone see weakness was a luxury she'd never been able to afford. The elevator was 30 feet away. It might as well have been 30 miles. That's when she heard the footsteps, the quiet squeak of rubber soles on polished floors that she'd heard dozens of times before without really hearing, background noise in the symphony of her empire. The night cleaning crew. People she'd passed in hallways 100 times without making eye contact, without really seeing them at all beyond noting their efficiency in keeping her world pristine and invisible. Shame hit her even through the agony. She'd prided herself on not being like the other executives who treated service workers like furniture, but the truth was carved into this moment with surgical precision. She didn't know any of their names, didn't know their stories, didn't know anything beyond the fact that they appeared after hours and made problems disappear. "Help!" Her voice came out as a whisper, barely audible over the hum of the HVAC system. "Please, somebody." The footsteps stopped. Then they started again, faster now, purposeful. A figure appeared at the end of the hallway, a man in the charcoal uniform of building security, not the green of the cleaning service. Tall, maybe 6'2", with shoulders that spoke of physical labor and a face that seemed carved from something weathered and permanent. His dark hair was touched with gray at the temples, and as he moved toward her with frightening speed, Lena noticed his eyes, pale gray, the color of winter sky, scanning her with an intensity that was almost clinical. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay with me." His voice was low, steady, utterly devoid of panic. "Can you tell me where the pain is?" "My side." Lena's breath came in shallow gasps. The pain was transcendent now, erasing everything else. Right side. I think, I think something's really wrong. He was beside her in 3 strides, dropping into a crouch with practiced ease. Up close, she could see he was probably in his late 30s, with the kind of face that suggested he'd spent considerable time squinting into harsh light, desert sun maybe, or the glare off snow in high altitudes. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow, another along his jawline. His hands, as they reached toward her, were large and scarred across the knuckles. I'm going to touch your abdomen, okay? I need to assess what we're dealing with. He didn't wait for permission, his fingers already moving to the source of her pain with a gentleness that contradicted the obvious strength in those hands. This is going to hurt. I'm sorry. The pressure of his examination sent lightning through her nervous system. Lena heard herself cry out, a sound she barely recognized as her own voice. McBurney's point is rigid, rebound tenderness, elevated heart rate. He was talking to himself now, his voice taking on a different quality. Clipped, efficient, the cadence of someone running through a mental checklist built from repetition. Ma'am, I think your appendix has ruptured. You're going into septic shock. We need to get you to a hospital now. Through the haze of pain, Lena processed his words with the part of her brain that had gotten her through Harvard Business School while working 3 jobs. This wasn't the fumbling assessment of a security guard who'd taken a weekend first aid course. This was expertise, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd made these determinations before under circumstances that probably made a corporate hallway seem comfortable. Who are you? The question came out weaker than she intended. Right now, I'm the person keeping you alive. He was already moving, shrugging out of his security jacket with swift economy. Underneath, he wore a simple gray t-shirt that revealed arms corded with muscle and marked with ink. Lena's fading vision caught fragments, symbols, words, images she couldn't quite process. I'm going to apply pressure to your abdomen to try to contain the internal bleeding. It's going to be extremely painful. Then I'm calling 911. No. The word escaped before Lena could think it through. No ambulance, can't. The press. If this gets out. He paused, those gray eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that cut through even the pain. Ma'am, with all due respect, you're dying. I don't particularly care about your press concerns. You don't understand. Lena tried to push herself up, but her arms were shaking too badly. The acquisition. If the board thinks I'm weak, if the Singapore team sees I'm the youngest CEO in the sector, they're waiting for me to fail. One sign of weakness, and you'll be the youngest CEO with a headstone. His voice didn't rise, but something in it stopped her protest cold. I've watched people die from ruptured appendixes. It's not quick, and it's not pretty. Your choice is simple. Risk your reputation or guarantee your death. Choose fast. The bluntness should have angered her. Instead, it clarified everything with brutal honesty. Lena had built her empire on calculated risks, on seeing situations clearly and acting decisively. The pain was making her stupid, making her prioritize image over survival. Call them, she whispered. But can we go somewhere private? Not here in the hallway where cameras. There's a private medical suite on the executive level. He was already lifting her with surprising gentleness, one arm under her knees, the other supporting her back. I've seen it during security walkthroughs. It's meant for board members who need discretion. That work for you? Lena tried to nod, but the movement sent fresh waves of agony radiating through her core. She'd never been carried as an adult, had built her entire identity around being the one who carried others, who bore the weight of decisions and responsibilities that would crush weaker people. Being held like this, helpless, dependent, completely at someone else's mercy, was almost as disorienting as the pain. He moved through the hallways with purpose, navigating the executive level like he'd memorized the layout, which, Lena supposed, he probably had. Security would need to know every inch of the building. She'd approved the hiring protocols herself, though she'd never bothered to meet the night shift crew. They were just names on a spreadsheet, budget lines under facility management. The medical suite was 3 hallways over, tucked behind an unmarked door that most employees didn't know existed. It was part of the executive package, complete with an examination table, basic medical supplies, and enough privacy that board members could handle minor health issues without the indignity of public hospitals. Lena had authorized its installation, but never imagined using it herself. She didn't get sick, she didn't get weak, she didn't need help. Until tonight. He laid her on the examination table with practiced care, then moved immediately to the supply cabinets. The medical kit here is basic, but it'll do until the ambulance arrives. I need you to stay conscious. Can you do that for me? I don't even know your name. Lena's voice sounded distant to her own ears, like she was hearing herself through water. Daniel Cole. He was back at her side with gauze, antiseptic, and what looked like a blood pressure cuff. I'm going to take your vitals, then I'm calling 911. After that, I'm going to do everything I can to keep you stable until they arrive. You understanding me? Former military. It wasn't a question. Lena had spent enough time in board meetings with defense contractors to recognize the bearing, the efficiency of movement, the way he approached crisis with systematic calm. Combat medic? Something flickered across his face. Not quite pain, but an echo of it, like the memory of an old injury that still ached in cold weather. A long time ago. Right now focus on staying with me. What's your name? You don't know who I am? Even in extremis, the question carried surprise. Everyone knew who she was. Her face had been on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, Time. She was the darling of Silicon Valley, the bootstrapped success story that proved the American dream was alive for those willing to sacrifice everything for it. I know you're the CEO. I know you sign my paychecks indirectly, and I know you're about 30 minutes from systemic organ failure if we don't get you help. His hands were moving as he spoke, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around her arm with impersonal efficiency. Name? Lena. Lena Cross. Okay, Lena, I need you to listen very carefully. The blood pressure cuff tightened, released. His face showed no reaction to whatever numbers he was reading, but Lena saw his jaw tighten fractionally. Your blood pressure is low and dropping. Your heart rate is elevated. Those are signs of shock. I'm going to start an IV to get fluids into you, then I'm calling for emergency transport. The paramedics will be here in approximately 12 minutes given our location. My job is to make sure you survive those 12 minutes. Your job is to stay conscious and keep talking to me. Deal? Deal. The word came out slurred. Everything was taking on a dreamlike quality, edges softening, sounds becoming muffled. Daniel? I'm right here. He was inserting an IV with the kind of casual competence that suggested he'd done it hundreds of times in worse conditions. Lena felt the stick of the needle, then the cool rush of saline entering her vein. Stay with me, Lena. Tell me about this acquisition you're so worried about. She understood what he was doing, keeping her talking, keeping her present, keeping her brain engaged so she didn't slip away into the peaceful darkness that was trying very hard to pull her under. It was a kindness delivered with tactical precision. Singapore. The words felt thick in her mouth. Tech manufacturing. If we land it, Cross Enterprises becomes the largest independent hardware supplier in the Asian market. But the board, they don't think I can close it. Too young, too female, too competent, probably. Daniel was on his phone now, his free hand never leaving her wrist, monitoring her pulse. This is Daniel Cole, security officer at Cross Enterprises Tower, executive level. I have a 29-year-old female with suspected ruptured appendix, signs of septic shock and internal bleeding. Blood pressure is 80/50 and dropping. Heart rate is 130 and climbing. I've started an IV with normal saline wide open. His voice faded into background noise as Lena's vision started to tunnel again. The pain had evolved beyond sensation into something almost transcendent, a white noise that was erasing her ability to process anything else. She was floating now, untethered, and the part of her brain that was still working understood with crystalline clarity that she was dying. Lena! Daniel's voice cut through the fog like a blade. Eyes on me! Right now! She forced her gaze to focus on his face. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair, the tiny scar tissue on his knuckles that spoke of old injuries. His eyes were locked on hers with an intensity that felt like a physical tether, pulling her back from the edge. That's good. That's really good. Keep looking at me. His hand found hers, squeezed with careful pressure. The ambulance is 6 minutes out. I need you to hold on for 6 more minutes. Can you do that? Tired. The word escaped on a breath. So tired, Daniel. I know you are, but you're not done yet. Something in his voice changed, became harder, more commanding. You're a CEO. You fought for everything you have. 6 minutes is nothing compared to what you've already survived. So you're going to stay with me, and you're going to keep fighting, because I didn't pull you off that hallway floor just to watch you quit now. The words were harsh, but they worked. Lena felt a spark of indignation cut through the fatigue. She didn't quit. She'd never quit at anything in her entire life. That's it. I see that fire. Daniel's thumb was moving across the back of her hand in small circles, a gesture that was probably meant to be comforting but felt more like he was trying to keep her blood flowing, keep her engaged with physical sensation. Tell me about your family. Someone who needs to know you're okay. No one. The admission hurt worse than the physical pain. Parents died when I was 19. Car accident, no siblings. Built the company from their life insurance money and student loans. There's no one who... She trailed off, the implications of her own words sinking in with horrifying clarity. If she died tonight, who would even notice beyond the board members worried about stock prices? Who would mourn Lena Cross the person, rather than Lena Cross the CEO? Then you hold on for yourself. Daniel's voice was firm. Because you've built something. You matter, and I'm not letting you go. The declaration should have sounded presumptuous, maybe even patronizing. Instead, it felt like an anchor. This stranger, this night shift security guard, who she'd never bothered to notice in 3 years of walking past him, was the only thing standing between her and oblivion. Why? The question came out barely audible. Why do you care? Something complex moved across Daniel's face. Because I've watched too many people die who wanted to live. I'll be damned if I watch someone die who has everything to live for. The distant wail of sirens filtered through the building's walls. Daniel's expression shifted immediately, tension leaving his shoulders in a visible wave. That's our ride. 2 minutes, maybe less. You're going to make it, Lena. Don't leave. She heard the desperation in her own voice and hated it, but couldn't stop the words, Please don't leave me. I'm not going anywhere. His hand tightened around hers. I'll be right here until they take you, and even then, I'll make sure they know exactly what they're dealing with. You have my word. The next 2 minutes stretched and compressed simultaneously, time becoming elastic under the weight of pain and fear. Lena was aware of voices, loud, professional, the controlled chaos of emergency responders arriving with equipment and authority. Daniel's voice rose above them, delivering a report with military precision, vitals, symptoms, interventions, timeline. He spoke the language of emergency medicine fluently, translating her crisis into clinical terms that the paramedics absorbed with nods and swift action. Sir, we've got it from here. A female paramedic with kind eyes was shouldering Daniel aside gently but firmly. You did good work keeping her stable. She's got peritonitis from a ruptured appendix, at least 4 hours advanced. Daniel wasn't moving away, his hand still holding Lena's. She's going to need emergency surgery, and she's going to need it fast. Her pressure's been dropping steadily for the last 10 minutes. She doesn't have time for red tape. We'll make sure she gets priority. The paramedic was already moving, her partner sliding a gurney beside the examination table. You family? No? Daniel's hand released Lena's slowly, reluctantly. Just the person who found her. As they transferred her to the gurney, Lena caught one last clear look at Daniel Cole. He was standing against the wall, his security jacket forgotten on a chair, his gray t-shirt marked with her blood. But what captured her attention, what she would remember later with crystalline clarity, were his arms. The tattoos she'd glimpsed earlier were visible now, in full detail. His right forearm carried the crossed rifles and caduceus she'd recognized earlier, but there was more. Coordinates that might have marked battles or graves. Dates that probably carried significance beyond mere numbers. Names written in script that suggested memorial rather than decoration. His left arm carried a detailed combat medic insignia surrounded by what looked like dog tags. Too many of them, each one probably representing a soldier who hadn't made it home. These weren't the tattoos of someone who'd served a quiet tour pushing papers at a stateside base. These were the markings of someone who'd been deep in it, who'd held the line between life and death in places where infrastructure had collapsed and hope was a luxury. "Who are you really?" Lena whispered as they began to wheel her toward the elevator. Daniel's gray eyes met hers one last time. "Someone who's learned that every life matters, regardless of what uniform they're wearing or what position they hold. You're going to be fine, Miss Cross. And when you wake up after surgery, maybe you'll remember that the person mopping your floors is someone's whole world too." Then the elevator doors closed, and he was gone. The surgery took 4 hours. Dr. Sarah Chen, the chief of emergency surgery at St. Catherine's Hospital, would later tell Lena that she'd arrived with barely 20 minutes to spare before the infection in her abdominal cavity became unsurvivable. Another hour, maybe less, and no amount of surgical skill would have saved her. "Someone kept you alive long enough for us to work our magic," Dr. Chen said during Lena's first fully conscious moment in recovery. "Whoever did your initial stabilization knew exactly what they were doing. Military training, I'd guess. Combat medic, probably." Lena had wanted to ask more questions, but the anesthesia dragged her back under before she could form words. When she woke again, it was to find Marcus Webb sitting in the chair beside her bed, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, his Armani suit pressed to knife edges. Marcus was her COO, the man who'd been her mentor since she'd launched Cross Enterprises in her dorm room, the closest thing she had to family in the business world. "You gave us quite a scare, Lena." His voice carried relief layered under concern. "The board has been calling non-stop. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck, run over by a second truck, then backed up on by both trucks for good measure." Lena's voice came out raspy, her throat raw from intubation. "How bad is the damage? To the company, I mean." Marcus's expression shifted into something that might have been approval or exasperation. With him, it was often both. "Even from a hospital bed, you're worried about the company. That's exactly why you're the CEO, and I'm just the person who makes sure your vision becomes reality." "Marcus, seriously, the acquisition is on hold for 2 weeks while you recover." He held up a hand to forestall her protest. "Doctor's orders, board approval, non-negotiable. Singapore understands. If anything, your work ethic, pushing through a ruptured appendix until you literally collapsed, has impressed them. Shows dedication. Shows stupidity." Lena shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at surgical incisions. "I should have gone to the hospital hours earlier. I thought I could handle it." "You've always thought you could handle everything." Marcus's tone gentled. "That's both your greatest strength and your most dangerous weakness." Speaking of handling things, he pulled out his phone, scrolled through something, then turned the screen toward her. This was the only media we couldn't contain. The image showed the front of Cross Enterprises Tower in the pre-dawn darkness. An ambulance pulled up to the private executive entrance, paramedics loading a gurney. The photo was grainy, taken from distance, but Lena could make out her own form on the stretcher. Standing in the background, barely visible in the shadows, was a tall figure in dark clothing. A freelance photographer camps out near the building sometimes, hoping to catch executives in compromising positions. He got this and sold it to a gossip blog before we could buy it back. Marcus's jaw tightened with disapproval. "The good news is the photo is ambiguous enough that we've been able to spin it as a board member who got food poisoning at a working dinner. No one knows it was you." Lena stared at the figure in the shadows. Even in the poor quality image, she recognized Daniel's posture, the set of his shoulders. He'd stayed. Even after the paramedics took over, even after his job was technically done, he'd followed them down to the ambulance bay. "Who is that?" She pointed to the figure. "Security guard, I think. Night shift. Why?" "He's the one who found me. The one who kept me alive until the ambulance arrived." Lena's hand drifted to her abdomen, feeling the bandages that covered the surgical site. "Dr. Chen said another hour and I would have died. He bought me that hour, Marcus." "Then we should send him a bonus. A significant one." Marcus was already typing notes into his phone, ever efficient. "I'll have HR pull his file, arrange appropriate compensation." "No!" Marcus looked up, surprised. "No? I want to thank him myself, privately." Lena wasn't sure why the distinction mattered, only that it did. He asked for nothing, didn't try to leverage the situation, didn't call press, didn't do anything except help because he could. That's rare, Marcus. That's decent human behavior, Marcus countered, which shouldn't be rare but somehow is, especially in our world. He studied her with the assessing gaze that had made him a legend in corporate strategy. You're different. Something about this has shaken you. I collapsed in my own building, and the only person who noticed was someone I've walked past 100 times without seeing. Lena's voice came out harder than she intended. Someone whose name I didn't know, whose story I never bothered to learn. What does that say about me? It says you're a CEO of a major corporation with 1,000 demands on your attention every day. Marcus's tone was gentle but firm. You can't know everyone, Lena. That's not a moral failing, it's basic mathematics. Maybe. Lena closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her. But I knew I needed help, and the only person who answered was someone I'd rendered invisible. That has to mean something. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried an unusual note of vulnerability. When I had my heart attack 3 years ago, I was in my office alone at 2 a.m., working on the Henderson merger. You know who found me? The cleaning woman whose name I'd never learned. She called 911, stayed with me, held my hand while I was terrified I'd die before my kids graduated college. I never told you because I was embarrassed. But yes, Lena, it means something. Lena opened her eyes to find her mentor looking older than she'd ever seen him, the polished veneer cracking just enough to show the human underneath. Her name was Rosa, Marcus continued. She worked for the building cleaning service for 12 years. I gave her a thank you card and a gift certificate to a restaurant she probably couldn't actually afford to eat at, even with the certificate. It's one of my deepest regrets that I never really understood what she gave me that night. What happened to her? She retired 2 years ago, moved back to Guatemala to be near her grandchildren. Marcus smiled sadly. I sent her a generous check with her retirement. It was the least I could do, and far less than she deserved. Lena processed this in silence, adding it to her growing understanding that her near-death experience was revealing truths about her life she'd been too busy succeeding to notice. Find out everything about Daniel Cole, she said finally, not for compensation, for understanding. I need to know who he is, why he's working night security when he clearly has the skills for more, and what I can do to properly acknowledge what he did. I'll have a full background report by tomorrow. Marcus stood, smoothing his suit. Rest now. The company will survive 2 weeks without you micromanaging every decision. Your job is to heal. After he left, Lena lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of that night in fragments. Daniel's calm voice, his steady hands, the way he'd refused to let her slip away, commanding her to stay present, with an authority that brooked no argument. The tattoos. She kept coming back to the tattoos. Each mark had been a choice, a permanent record of something that mattered enough to carry forever. The coordinates might have been where friends died. The dates might have marked the worst days of his life. And yet he wore them openly, unashamed, a walking memorial to battles that most people would want to forget. Who chooses to carry their trauma that visibly? Someone who's learned that forgetting is worse than remembering, Lena thought. Someone who's decided that the weight of memory is the price of honor. She'd built her empire by being forward-looking, by refusing to be dragged down by setbacks or losses. When her parents died, she'd channeled grief into ambition. When early investors rejected her, she'd used their dismissal as fuel. When the tech press called her company a long shot, she'd worked twice as hard to prove them wrong. But maybe, in all that forward momentum, she'd lost something essential. Maybe there was wisdom in pausing to acknowledge debts, to recognize that success wasn't a solo achievement, but a collective effort built on the labor of people whose names never made it into Forbes articles. The night shift worker who kept the building clean so she could focus on strategy. The security guard who kept watch so she could work late without fear. The IT staff who maintained systems so her vision could flow uninterrupted into reality. Daniel Cole had saved her life, yes, but more than that, he'd shown her how blind she'd become to the infrastructure of human effort that made her success possible. When she closed her eyes, she saw his gray eyes locked on hers, heard his voice cutting through the pain. I'm not letting you go. A stranger had cared more about her survival than she'd cared about learning his name. That, Lena decided, was going to change. The background report Marcus delivered 2 days later was simultaneously illuminating and frustrating in what it revealed and what it concealed. Daniel Cole, 38 years old, had served 12 years in the Army as a combat medic, including 4 deployments to Afghanistan and 2 to Iraq. His service record was exemplary. Multiple commendations for valor, 2 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star. The details of his decorations were sparse, hidden behind classification markers and redacted paragraphs. But what came through clearly was a portrait of someone who'd run toward danger repeatedly, while others ran away. He'd left the service 6 years ago with an honorable discharge and a recommendation letter from his commanding officer that described him as one of the finest medics and human beings I've had the privilege of serving alongside. After his discharge, Daniel had worked briefly as an emergency room nurse, then as a paramedic. Both positions had ended not due to performance issues, but due to what HR files delicately termed excessive risk-taking in pursuit of patient welfare. Reading between the lines, Lena surmised that Daniel had prioritized saving lives over following protocols, a trait that served well in combat, but less so in liability-conscious civilian medicine. For the past 4 years, he'd worked night security at Cross Enterprises Tower, a massive step down in both prestige and pay from his previous roles. His employment file was thin, perfect attendance, no complaints, annual reviews that praised his professionalism and discretion. He was, by all accounts, invisible in the way that good security should be. The most important detail, however, came in a single line that Marcus had highlighted. Emergency contact, Emma Cole, daughter, age 12. Daniel was a single father. That fact recontextualized everything. A man with combat medic training working night security wasn't underachieving or wasting his potential. He was choosing stability over prestige, choosing to be present for his daughter over chasing career advancement. The night shift probably meant he could be there for school drop-offs, for homework help, for all the small moments that added up to a childhood. He'd sacrificed his career trajectory for fatherhood. How many men in Lena's professional circle could say the same? There's more. Marcus was watching her read with careful attention. I did some additional digging through unofficial channels. Daniel's wife, Emma's mother, died 5 years ago, cancer. By all accounts, he left emergency medicine because the irregular hours and emotional toll were incompatible with single parenthood. He chose his daughter over everything else. Lena looked up from the report. Everything else, including proper recognition for saving my life, I'm guessing. Has he said anything to anyone about that night? Nothing. According to the building security supervisor, Daniel filed a standard incident report noting that he'd provided first aid to an executive who'd experienced a medical emergency. No names, no details, no attempt to leverage the situation. Marcus's expression carried a mix of respect and puzzlement. He's been offered interviews by 3 news outlets who somehow got wind that there was more to the story. He's declined all of them. Because attention would disrupt the quiet life he's built for his daughter. Lena set the report aside. He's not interested in being a hero. He just wants to keep his head down, do his job, and be there for Emma. Admirable, if somewhat frustrating from a PR perspective. Marcus settled into the visitor chair. A feel-good story about a former combat medic saving the CEO would be excellent press for the company. But I respect his choice, and I assume you will too. Of course. Well, Lena was already thinking 3 steps ahead, a habit that had served her well in business. But that doesn't mean I can't thank him properly. Privately. I had HR put together a compensation package, 6 months' salary as a bonus, plus a commendation letter for his personnel file. Marcus pulled out a folder. Standard protocol for employees who go above and beyond. Lena barely glanced at the folder. Not enough. Lena, 6 months' salary for a security guard is nearly $40,000. I said it's not enough. She cut him off with the tone that ended arguments in boardrooms. Money is easy, Marcus. Money is what we give to people we want to pay off and forget about. Daniel Cole didn't just save my life. He showed me something about myself that I needed to see. That deserves more than a check. Marcus leaned back, studying her with the gaze that suggested he was recalculating assumptions. What did you have in mind? I don't know yet, Lena admitted. But I know that standard protocols don't apply here. Give me time to think about it. You're still recovering from major surgery. Maybe don't overthink. I nearly died, Marcus. I get one chance to respond to that reality in a way that means something. Lena's voice was quiet but absolute. I'm not going to waste it on standard protocols. After Marcus left, Lena returned to the background report, reading it more carefully this time, looking for details that might illuminate who Daniel Cole really was beyond the bare facts of employment and service record. There were hints, if you knew how to look. He'd listed his address as a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood 20 minutes from downtown. He'd declined the company health insurance, suggesting he had coverage through veterans' benefits. His emergency contact form listed not just Emma, but also a Mrs. Patricia Morrison with a note that read, Neighbor-backup guardian. A man who'd arranged backup care for his daughter. A father who thought ahead, who planned for contingencies, who probably had a go-bag ready and knew exactly what to do if Emma needed him. The kind of person who'd spent years in situations where preparation meant the difference between life and death. Lena found herself wondering about Emma Cole. What was it like growing up with a father who'd seen combat, who carried the weight of old wars in tattoos and scars? Did she know what Daniel had done before becoming a security guard? Did she understand that her father had once run into gunfire to save strangers, that he'd held the line between survival and death in deserts half a world away? Did Emma know that her father was a hero who'd chosen to be a dad instead? The questions multiplied, and with them came a growing certainty. She couldn't just cut a check and call it even. Daniel Cole had given her something far more valuable than emergency medical intervention. He'd given her a glimpse of what it looked like to live with purpose beyond profit, to make choices based on values rather than advancement. She wanted to understand that. More than that, she wanted to honor it in a way that respected his privacy and his choices. The problem was that Lena Cross was accustomed to solving problems with resources, money, connections, corporate power. She could buy solutions, leverage relationships, deploy capital to achieve outcomes. But this situation called for something different, something she wasn't sure she knew how to give. Genuine human recognition that came with no strings attached, no ulterior motives, no attempt to control or manage the narrative. Just gratitude, pure and simple. It should have been easy. Somehow, it felt like the hardest challenge she'd ever faced. Lena was still pondering this when her phone rang. Not her personal cell, but the company line that only a handful of people had access to. The screen showed an internal number from Cross Enterprises. Lena Cross. She answered with habitual professionalism, then immediately regretted it. She was supposed to be recovering, not taking work calls. Ms. Cross, this is David Chen from Building Security. The voice on the other end was young, nervous. I apologize for disturbing you during your medical leave, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. Lena sat up straighter, ignoring the pull of surgical incisions. What kind of situation? It's about Daniel Cole, the security officer who assisted you last week. He submitted his resignation effective immediately. When asked for a reason, he stated only that it was a personal decision and thanked us for the opportunity to serve. The young man paused. Given the circumstances, I thought you'd want to know before we processed his departure. The news hit Lena like a physical blow. When did he submit this? About an hour ago, end of his shift. He turned in his uniform, his badge, and walked out before anyone could ask questions. Daniel was running. The realization came with absolute clarity. Somehow, the attention around that night had penetrated his carefully maintained privacy. Maybe a colleague had connected dots. Maybe someone had leaked information despite NDAs. Maybe the news outlets had been more persistent than he'd anticipated. Whatever the cause, Daniel Cole was doing what he'd probably done his entire adult life when situations became untenable. He was executing a tactical withdrawal. Hold the resignation paperwork, Lena ordered. Don't process anything until I've had a chance to speak with him directly. Ms. Cross, with respect, you're on medical leave. I'm aware. Put a 48-hour hold on processing his resignation, citing administrative review. That's not a request, David. Yes, ma'am. Consider it done. Lena ended the call and immediately dialed Marcus. He answered on the first ring, probably expecting bad news given that she was supposed to be resting. What's wrong? Daniel Cole just quit. I need his home address, and I need a car to take me there. Lena was already swinging her legs over the side of the hospital bed, testing her ability to stand. The movement sent sharp pains through her abdomen, but nothing she couldn't manage. Absolutely not. You're 3 days post-op. Marcus, he's running because he thinks the attention will disrupt his life and his daughter's life. If I don't talk to him now, before he disappears completely, I lose the chance to make this right. Lena's voice carried the absolute certainty that had driven every major decision of her career. I'm going with or without your help. Your choice is whether I go safely with a driver and your support, or whether I try to Uber there against medical advice. Marcus's sigh carried the weight of 6 years watching Lena bull through obstacles that would stop most people. Fine, but I'm coming with you, and if you rip your stitches, I'm telling the surgeon it was against my explicit recommendations. Deal, I'll be ready in 20 minutes. Lena, you're wearing a hospital gown. Then have someone bring me clothes. I'm not having this conversation dressed like a patient. 30 minutes later, dressed in the spare business casual outfit Marcus had somehow procured, she didn't ask how, Lena was settled into the back of a town car heading toward an address in a neighborhood she'd never visited despite living in the city for 8 years. Marcus sat beside her, periodically checking his phone and muttering about liability issues and recovery protocols. You know this is insane, he said for the 3rd time. Noted. Lena watched the city scroll past, seeing neighborhoods she typically drove through without noticing. Tell me about this area. Working class mostly. Mix of families, young professionals priced out of downtown, some elderly folks who've been here since the neighborhood was blue-collar industrial. Marcus consulted his phone. Good schools, low crime, strong community feel. Not where I'd expect someone with Daniel's credentials to end up, but probably perfect for raising a kid on a security guard's salary. The implication hung between them. Daniel Cole could have leveraged his military record and medical training into something more lucrative, more prestigious. Instead, he'd chosen stability in a neighborhood where Emma could walk to school safely and have friends whose parents weren't obsessed with achievement metrics. The car pulled up in front of a well-maintained apartment complex that looked like it had been built in the 70s and updated periodically with fresh paint and landscaping. Nothing fancy, but clean and cared for. A small playground sat in the center courtyard where several children were playing under the supervision of adults. Lena assumed were parents or caregivers. Normal life, she thought, the kind of ordinary, stable existence she'd left behind in pursuit of extraordinary success. Unit 2B, Marcus said, checking his phone. 2nd floor, corner unit. Lena took a breath, steadying herself against the pull of healing incisions and the weight of what she needed to say. Wait here. This conversation needs to be private. If you're not back in 15 minutes, I'm coming to find you. Deal. The stairs to the 2nd floor tested her resolve, each step a reminder that she was 3 days removed from emergency surgery. But Lena had built her career on pushing through discomfort, on refusing to let physical limitations dictate her choices. A little post-surgical pain was nothing compared to the importance of this conversation. She found Unit 2B and knocked before she could second-guess herself. The door opened almost immediately, and Lena found herself face-to-face with a girl who had to be Emma Cole. She had her father's gray eyes and dark hair, though hers fell in waves to her shoulders. She was dressed in jeans and a t-shirt advertising a local science museum, and she held a book in one hand with her finger marking a place. Can I help you? The question was polite but cautious. A kid who'd been taught not to open doors to strangers but wasn't quite sure what to do in this specific situation. My name is Lena Cross. I'm looking for Daniel Cole. Is he home? Recognition flashed across Emma's face, followed immediately by something that looked like concern. You're the lady from the building, the one who got sick. Yes. Is your dad here? Emma, who's at the door? Daniel's voice came from inside the apartment, and then he was there, appearing behind his daughter with the same swift purposefulness he'd shown in every interaction Lena had witnessed. He was dressed in civilian clothes, jeans and a plain gray Henley, and for the first time she saw him in a context that wasn't defined by emergency or employment. His expression when he saw Lena cycled through surprise, concern, and resignation in rapid succession. Ms. Cross, you should be in the hospital. I was discharged yesterday against Dr. Chen's strenuous objections. Lena gestured at herself, noting his assessing gaze, cataloging her condition with practiced speed. I'm healing well, thanks to someone buying me enough time to reach surgery. May I come in? I promise this won't take long. Daniel hesitated, his hand on Emma's shoulder in a gesture that was both protective and grounding. Then he nodded, stepping back. Emma, can you give us a few minutes? You can read in your room. But I wanted to finish this chapter in the living room. Emma. The single word carried gentle authority. Please. The girl looked between them with an expression suggesting she understood this was adult business that concerned her but from which she was being deliberately excluded. She disappeared down a hallway with her book, closing a door with just enough force to register protest without quite qualifying as a slam. Daniel gestured Lena toward a small living room furnished simply but comfortably, a couch that looked like it had weathered years of use but was clean and maintained, a bookshelf crowded with a mix of medical texts, military history, and what appeared to be Emma's young adult fiction collection, a coffee table covered with homework papers and pencils. It was the home of someone who had their priorities straight. You shouldn't be here. Daniel remained standing, his posture carrying echoes of military bearing even in casual clothes. You're barely 3 days post-op. If you rip your stitches, then I'll deal with the consequences, just like I dealt with the consequences of ignoring my appendix until it ruptured. Lena settled carefully onto the couch. I'm here because you quit, and I think I know why. Daniel's expression closed down, becoming unreadable. It was time to move on. It was time to run before anyone could make you uncomfortable by acknowledging what you did. Lena kept her voice gentle but firm. Someone leaked information to the press. Suddenly there are reporters asking questions, and you decided the safest thing for Emma was to disappear back into anonymity. My daughter's privacy is not negotiable. The words came out hard, absolute. I don't care what I did or didn't do. Emma doesn't need to be part of some feel-good story about her dad playing hero. She needs stability, routine, and a life that doesn't include cameras and questions. I agree completely. Lena's response seemed to catch him off guard. Which is why I'm here, in person, having this conversation privately instead of sending HR or releasing a press statement. You saved my life, Daniel. I owe you more than a disrupted life as payment. You don't owe me anything. Daniel moved to the window, looking out at the courtyard where Emma's peers were playing. I did what anyone with my training would do. It wasn't personal, it wasn't heroic, it was just necessary. The fact that you're recovering well is all the payment I need. Except it was personal. Lena rose carefully, moving to stand near him, though not close enough to invade his space. You held my hand. You kept me talking. You told me I mattered, even though you'd never met me before that night. That's personal, Daniel. That's human connection in the middle of crisis. His jaw tightened. Ms. Cross, Lena, if we're going to have this conversation, you should use my name. Lena. He turned to face her, and she saw the same intensity in his gray eyes that had kept her anchored that night. I've spent 6 years building a life for Emma, where the only thing that matters is that she's safe, happy, and able to be a kid. No cameras, no attention, no complications. What you're offering, gratitude, recognition, whatever, it comes with complications. People will want to know my story. They'll want to know about Emma's mom, about my service, about why I'm working security instead of emergency medicine. And once that door opens, I can't close it again. So you're choosing to close it by running. Lena understood the impulse even as she knew it was ultimately futile. But here's what you're not considering. Emma already knows you're remarkable. Kids aren't stupid, Daniel. She knows her dad has skills that most security guards don't have. She knows there's more to your story. By refusing to acknowledge it, you're teaching her that extraordinary things should be hidden and that service deserves no recognition. Daniel's expression shifted, something flickering across his face that might have been uncertainty. I'm not saying you should court publicity. I'm not saying you should let anyone exploit your story or Emma's privacy. Lena pressed her advantage carefully, knowing she was working against years of defensive instincts. I'm saying that there's a middle ground between seeking attention and pretending nothing happened, and I'm asking for your help finding that middle ground, because I need to acknowledge what you did in a way that respects your choices while also not pretending I owe you nothing. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sounds of children playing in the courtyard and the muffled hum of city traffic. Daniel was thinking, processing, probably running through scenarios with the same tactical assessment he'd use in any high-stakes situation. Finally, he spoke. "What exactly are you proposing?" It was the opening Lena had been hoping for. Not agreement, but willingness to listen. "I don't know yet. That's why I'm here. To understand what you need, what Emma needs, and what would actually honor what happened without disrupting your lives. It starts with a conversation, Daniel. That's all I'm asking for. One conversation where we figure out how to handle this in a way that works for everyone. And if I say the only thing that works is for you to leave and never mention this again, then I'll respect that." Lena met his gaze steadily. "But I'll also always know that I failed to honor a debt that matters more than any business deal I've ever closed. Your choice has to be made knowing that it has consequences for both of us, not just you and Emma." Daniel studied her for a long moment, and Lena had the sense of being evaluated with the same systematic precision he'd used when assessing her medical crisis. Whatever he saw must have satisfied some internal standard because his posture softened fractionally. "One conversation, but Emma stays out of it. This doesn't touch her life." "Agreed. And no press, no public statements, no leveraging this for corporate image." "Agreed. And if at any point I say we're done, we're done. No arguments, no second guessing, no attempts to change my mind." "Agreed." Lena extended her hand. "Do we have a deal?" Daniel looked at her hand for a moment, then took it. His grip was firm, his palm calloused in a way that suggested physical labor and old scars. "One conversation. That's all I'm committing to. That's all I'm asking." Lena felt the weight of the handshake, understanding that she was being granted something Daniel rarely gave: access to the carefully guarded boundaries of his private life. "When would work for you?" "Tomorrow night, after Emma's asleep. There's a diner 2 blocks from here that stays open late. 9 p.m., neutral ground. I'll be there." They released hands, and Daniel stepped back, his expression returning to the careful neutrality that probably served him well in security work. "You should get back to recovering, and maybe take your doctor's advice about resting." "I will, after tomorrow night." Lena moved toward the door, then paused. "Daniel, thank you. Not just for that night, but for this, for being willing to have the conversation." Something softened in his expression just briefly before the walls went back up. "You're persistent. Emma gets that from her mother. It's both admirable and deeply inconvenient. I suspect Emma is lucky to have inherited traits from both her parents." Lena opened the door, then looked back one more time. "See you tomorrow." As she descended the stairs carefully, Marcus was going to lecture her about aggravating her incisions. Lena felt something she hadn't experienced in years: uncertainty, mixed with anticipation. She'd negotiated billion-dollar deals with confidence, stared down hostile boardrooms without flinching, and built an empire through sheer force of will. But one conversation with a former combat medic turned night security guard felt more consequential than any of those victories. Because this time, success wasn't measured in profit margins or stock prices. It was measured in whether she could honor a debt to someone who wanted nothing except to be left alone to raise his daughter in peace. Somehow, that made it the most important negotiation of her career. Marcus was waiting by the car, his expression oscillating between concern and exasperation. "You look terrible." "Thanks for the honesty." Lena slid carefully into the back seat, not bothering to hide her wince. "But I got what I came for. Daniel agreed to meet tomorrow night to discuss how to handle this situation." "That's good. That's progress." Marcus climbed in beside her, his hand already moving to his phone to undoubtedly message someone about this development. "Though I notice you're favoring your left side and moving like someone who's just climbed stairs they had no business climbing. Tomorrow you can yell at me about my recovery choices. Tonight, just get me home so I can rest before I do something else stupid." "Tonight?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "It's 3 in the afternoon." "It feels like midnight." Lena let her head fall back against the seat, exhaustion crashing over her now that the adrenaline of confrontation had faded. "How do you do it, Marcus? How do you balance the demands of corporate success with being a decent human being who sees the people around you?" The question seemed to catch her COO off guard. He was quiet for a long moment before answering. Honestly, most days I don't. Most days I fail at one or both. But the trying matters, Lena. The conscious choice to keep trying even when it's inconvenient or difficult. That's what separates decent people from people who've forgotten how to be decent. I've been forgetting, Lena admitted quietly. Not intentionally, but through 1,000 small choices to prioritize efficiency over connection, results over relationships. Daniel showed me that. He didn't mean to, but he did. Then maybe nearly dying was the wake-up call you needed. Marcus's voice was gentle. Most people don't get a second chance to reevaluate their priorities. Don't waste yours. Lena closed her eyes, letting the motion of the car lull her toward the sleep her body desperately needed. Tomorrow night she'd sit across from Daniel Cole in a diner and try to find words that could bridge the gap between their worlds, between the CEO who'd forgotten how to see people and the father who'd sacrificed everything to protect his daughter's normalcy. She had no idea what that conversation would reveal, what accommodations they might reach, or whether it was even possible to properly honor what had happened without causing the very disruptions Daniel feared. But for the first time in years, Lena Cross was approaching a negotiation without a predetermined outcome, without a strategy designed to secure maximum advantage, without the armor of corporate certainty. She was approaching it as just Lena, a woman who'd been saved by a stranger and wanted to say thank you in a way that actually mattered. Somehow, that felt like the most honest thing she'd done in a decade. The diner Daniel had chosen was called Rosie's, a place that looked like it had been serving coffee and comfort food since before Lena was born. Red vinyl booths lined the windows, their surfaces patched but clean. The floor was checkered black and white linoleum that showed its age and worn patterns near the counter. A jukebox in the corner played something soft and instrumental, barely audible over the quiet conversations of the handful of late-night patrons scattered throughout the space. Lena arrived 10 minutes early, a habit born from years of business meetings where being first meant controlling the environment. But this wasn't a business meeting, and the only control she had was over her own expectations. She slid into a booth near the back, ordered coffee from a waitress who looked like she'd been working this shift since the Reagan administration, and waited. Daniel arrived exactly at 9, his punctuality suggesting military discipline never quite left you even years after discharge. He spotted her immediately, nodded once, and crossed the diner with the economical movement of someone who never wasted energy on unnecessary motion. He slid into the booth across from her, and Lana noticed he'd positioned himself facing the door. Another habit from another life. "You came," he said, as if there'd been doubt. "I said I would." Lena wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, seeking its warmth. "Thank you for agreeing to this." The waitress appeared before Daniel could respond, setting down a cup of black coffee without being asked. "The usual, Danny?" "Thanks, Marie." Daniel's smile transformed his face for a moment, showing a warmth that Lena hadn't seen before. "How's your grandson doing?" "Basketball scholarship came through, full ride to state." Marie's pride was evident in every word. "Your advice about the application essay made all the difference." "He did the work. I just pointed him in the right direction." Daniel took a sip of his coffee. "Tell him congratulations from me." Marie beamed, then turned to Lena. "You eating, honey? Or just coffee?" "Just coffee for now, thank you." After Marie left, Lena studied Daniel across the table. In the diner's softer lighting, he looked less like a security guard and more like what he actually was. A man in his late 30s carrying the weight of experiences most people only saw in movies. The scars she'd noticed before were more visible now, the one above his eyebrow, another along his jawline, a thin line on his neck that disappeared beneath his collar. "You're a regular here," she observed. "Emma and I come in for breakfast most Saturdays. Marie's known her since she was 6. Daniel's hands were wrapped around his own mug, his fingers showing the calluses and old scars of someone who'd worked with their hands for years. "This place is part of our routine, part of the normal life I've built for her." The implication was clear. This was his territory, his world, and Lena was the outsider being granted temporary access. She needed to respect that boundary. "Tell me about Emma," Lena said. "Not because I want details for some story, but because I want to understand what you're protecting." Daniel's expression shifted, becoming simultaneously guarded and open, in the way parents got when discussing their children, wanting to share pride while fearing exposure. She's 12, loves science, particularly biology, wants to be a marine biologist when she grows up, which is ambitious considering we live 500 miles from the nearest ocean. His mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. She's smart, probably smarter than I was at her age.
Gets that from her mother.
Your wife. Lena kept her voice gentle. I read in your file that she passed 5 years ago. I'm sorry. Cancer. Stage 4 by the time they caught it. She lasted 9 months after diagnosis. Daniel's voice was flat, factual, the tone of someone who'd learned to deliver painful information without letting emotion bleed through. Emma was 7, old enough to understand what was happening, young enough that she still believed we could fix it somehow. That must have been impossible. It was clarifying. Daniel took another drink of coffee. You learn fast what matters when you're watching someone you love die while trying to help a 7-year-old understand why her mother is disappearing piece by piece. Everything else, career, ambition, what other people think, all of it becomes noise. The only thing that mattered was being present for both of them while I could. Lena felt something twist in her chest. She'd built her entire identity around career and ambition, had sacrificed relationships and personal connections on the altar of professional success. What Daniel was describing was a complete inversion of her value system, and the worst part was that his version seemed infinitely more human. Is that why you left emergency medicine? Part of it. Daniel's gaze was steady, unflinching. The other part was that I couldn't do the work anymore without taking risks that endangered my ability to be there for Emma. In combat, you take calculated risks because the mission requires it. In civilian emergency medicine, you're supposed to follow protocols even when your instincts tell you there's a better way. I couldn't reconcile those two things, and I couldn't afford to lose my license over insubordination. So you chose a job that would never challenge your skills, but would guarantee you could be present for Emma. I chose a job where my daughter would never worry about whether I was coming home. Daniel's voice carried an edge now, defensive. You might see that as wasting my potential. I see it as being the parent Emma needs. I wasn't criticizing. Lena leaned forward slightly. I was observing that you made a choice most people wouldn't have the courage to make. You walked away from prestige and recognition to mop floors and check ID badges, and you did it because you understood what actually mattered. That's not weakness, Daniel. That's strength most people never develop. He studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes assessing. Why are you really here, Lena? And don't tell me it's just about gratitude. You could have sent a check, arranged a quiet bonus, and moved on with your life. Instead, you're sitting in a diner at 9 p.m. when you should be recovering from surgery, talking to a man you barely know about his life philosophy. What are you actually looking for? The directness of the question deserved an equally direct answer. Lena set down her coffee mug and met his gaze without flinching. I'm looking for understanding. When I collapsed in that hallway, I was completely alone by choice. I'd built a life where success meant never needing anyone, where vulnerability was weakness and connection was a liability. And then I nearly died, and the only person who noticed was someone I'd walked past hundreds of times without seeing. That's not gratitude talking, Daniel. That's shame. You can't see everyone. Daniel's response was immediate, almost reflexive. That's not realistic given your position. Maybe not, but I can see the person who saved my life. I can acknowledge that my definition of success has been incomplete. Lena's voice carried conviction built from 3 days of reflection in a hospital bed. You showed me something about myself I'd been avoiding. Now, I'm trying to figure out what to do with that knowledge. Daniel was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming a soft pattern on the table. When he spoke again, his voice carried less defensiveness and more curiosity. What do you think you learned? That I've been measuring my worth by the wrong metrics. The admission came easier than Lena expected. I've equated success with power, influence with importance, wealth with value. But when it came down to life and death, none of that mattered. What mattered was whether someone with the right skills and the right heart happened to be nearby. You were both, Daniel. And the fact that I didn't know your name before that night, didn't know your story, didn't see you as anything more than part of the building's infrastructure, that's on me. So this is about easing your conscience. It wasn't quite an accusation, but it carried weight. Partly, Lena admitted. But it's also about trying to become someone who doesn't need these kinds of wake-up calls to see clearly. I want to honor what you did, yes. But more than that, I want to understand how you made the choices you've made so I can make better choices going forward. Marie appeared with the coffee pot, topping off both their mugs without asking. She studied them for a moment with the perceptiveness of someone who'd spent decades reading people across diner tables. You two look like you're solving the world's problems. Need anything stronger than coffee? We're good, Marie. Thanks. Daniel's smile was genuine, absent of the guardedness he'd shown Lena. After she left, Lena asked the question that had been building since she'd read his background report. What happened over there? In Afghanistan and Iraq? What made you leave? Daniel's hands tightened around his mug. For a long moment, Lena thought he wouldn't answer, that she'd pushed too hard into territory that was clearly marked as private. Then he took a breath and began speaking in a voice that suggested he was reading from a script he'd memorized but rarely performed. I was a combat medic attached to infantry units. My job was to keep soldiers alive long enough to reach surgical facilities. Sometimes that meant treating wounds under fire. Sometimes it meant making impossible decisions about who could be saved and who couldn't. His eyes were focused somewhere past Lena, seeing something she couldn't. The tattoos you saw, the coordinates, the dates, the names, those are for the ones I couldn't save. Soldiers who died despite everything I did, or because I had to make a choice about who got help first. Lena stayed silent, understanding that interruption would break whatever thread was allowing him to share this. After 4 deployments, I had enough names on my arms that I was running out of space, enough faces in my head that I couldn't sleep without seeing them. Enough weight on my conscience that I was making mistakes. Small ones at first, then bigger. Daniel's jaw tightened. The last deployment, I made a call in the field that saved 3 soldiers but cost 2 others their lives because I allocated resources wrong. The Army cleared me of wrongdoing, said I'd made the best decision possible given available information. But I knew the truth. Which was? That I'd lost the edge that kept me effective. That I was operating on instinct and adrenaline instead of clear judgment. That if I stayed, eventually my mistakes would kill someone who could have been saved. Daniel finally looked at Lena directly. So I came home, met Sarah, Emma's mother, and tried to build a normal life. Worked emergency medicine for a while, but the trauma from over there followed me. Sarah got sick, and suddenly I had a reason to step away from medicine entirely. Emma needed a father who was present, stable, and not carrying the ghosts of war into their daily life. But you still carry them. Lena gestured to where she knew the tattoos were hidden beneath his long sleeves. You didn't erase the memories. You don't erase them. You learn to carry them properly. Daniel's voice was firm. Those names, those coordinates, they're not guilt. They're responsibility. Those soldiers trusted me with their lives. The least I can do is remember that trust, honor their sacrifice, and try to live in a way that justifies the fact that I made it home when they didn't. The weight of his words settled between them like something physical. Lena had spent years in boardrooms where people discussed casualties in terms of market share losses and unfortunate layoffs. Daniel was talking about actual human beings whose last moments had been spent in his care, whose families had received folded flags and condolence letters, whose names were now permanent fixtures on his skin. That's why you saved me, Lena said slowly, understanding crystallizing. Not because of some abstract duty or because it was your job, because you've lost too many people and you weren't going to lose another if you could prevent it. Partly. Daniel's expression softened slightly. But also because you deserve to live. Because Emma deserves to grow up in a world where people help each other when they can. Because somewhere there's someone who would have been devastated if you died that night, even if you think you're alone. I am alone. That's not self-pity, just fact. Lena's voice was steady. My parents are dead. I have no siblings, no partner, no children. The closest thing I have to family is Marcus, my COO, and he's essentially an employee with good boundaries. That's a choice, though. Daniel's words weren't judgmental, just observational. You've built that isolation deliberately as part of your success strategy. The question is whether it's actually working for you, or whether that night in the hallway showed you something different. Lena wanted to argue, to defend the life she'd built through sacrifice and determination. But the truth was that Daniel had identified exactly the question she'd been avoiding since waking up after surgery. Her isolation hadn't been imposed by circumstances. It had been engineered through 1,000 decisions to prioritize work over relationships, achievement over connection, individual success over collective support. "It's not working," she admitted quietly. "Or rather, it's working exactly as designed, and the design is flawed. I've built an empire, but no life. Achieved success, but lost meaning. And I didn't realize how completely I'd hollowed myself out until I was dying alone in a hallway I built. So change it." Daniel made it sound simple, which was both infuriating and clarifying. "You're the CEO. You control your schedule, your priorities, your life. If you don't like what you've built, build something different." "It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple. Not easy, but simple." Daniel leaned forward slightly, his intensity focused like a laser. "Every day you make thousands of decisions about where your time and attention go. Start making different decisions. Start seeing the people around you. Start building connections instead of just building market share. You have the power to change your life, Lena. Most people don't. Use it." The challenge in his voice sparked something in Lena that felt like anger but might have been hope. "You make it sound like I can just flip a switch and become a different person." "No, I'm saying you can make different choices that, over time, build into a different life." Daniel's voice gentled. "I didn't become a good father overnight. I made mistakes, failed Emma in ways large and small, and had to learn how to prioritize her needs over my own comfort. But every day I made the choice to try again, to do better, to be more present. That's all anyone can do. Make the next choice slightly better than the last one." Lena absorbed this, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. She'd spent her career thinking in terms of grand strategies and bold moves, but what Daniel was describing was something more fundamental, the accumulation of small, consistent choices that built into meaningful change. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's say I want to start making those different choices. Let's say I want to honor what you did by becoming someone who sees people instead of just resources. Where do I start?" Daniel considered the question seriously, his gaze drifting to the window where Rosie's neon sign cast colored light into the night. "Start with the people closest to you, the ones who work in your building every day. Learn their names, ask about their lives, not as some corporate initiative or PR strategy, but as genuine human interest. You don't have to be everyone's friend, but you can acknowledge their existence and their value." "That seems too small to matter." "Small things accumulate." Daniel's smile was slight but genuine. "Emma once asked me why I always say good morning to the crossing guard at her school, why I remember the name of the barista at our coffee shop, why I take time to chat with Marie about her grandson. I told her that every person we encounter is living a life as complex as ours, with dreams and struggles and stories that matter just as much as our own, recognizing that costs nothing and gives everything." Lena thought about her own daily routine, arriving at the office early, head down, focused on the day's priorities, leaving late, usually after everyone else had gone home. The security guards, the cleaning crew, the late-night IT staff. They were all just background presence, acknowledged with absent nods, if at all. "I walk past probably 50 people every day without really seeing them," she said slowly. "That's not efficiency. That's blindness." "It's learned behavior," Daniel corrected, "which means it can be unlearned. But it requires intention, Lena. You can't just decide to be more aware and expect it to happen automatically. You have to practice it daily until it becomes natural." "Is that what you did? After coming back from deployment?" "It's what I had to do to stay sane." Daniel's voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "Combat teaches you that life is fragile and people are precious." Coming home, I had to figure out how to live that truth in a world that had moved on without me. Being present for Emma, being part of a community, recognizing the humanity in everyone I encountered, that became my way of honoring the people I couldn't save by fully living the life they didn't get to have. The conversation was interrupted by Marie returning with 2 plates of pie, apple, warm, with the kind of crust that suggested decades of practice. She set them down without asking, adding forks with a knowing smile. "On the house, you both look like you need something sweet." After she left, Lena looked at the pie, then at Daniel. Does everyone in your life take care of you without being asked? It's what happens when you let people in. Daniel picked up his fork, cutting into the pie with obvious appreciation. Marie knows I like apple pie. She knows Emma prefers cherry. She knows we're usually here for breakfast, so seeing me at 9 p.m. means something's going on. That's not magic. It's what happens when you show up consistently and let people care. Lena took a bite of the pie, tasting cinnamon and butter and something that might have been nostalgia for a simpler life she'd never actually lived. I don't know how to let people care. I've spent so long being independent that accepting help feels like weakness. It felt that way for me too at first. Daniel's expression suggested he understood exactly what she meant. After Sarah died, everyone wanted to help. Bring meals, watch Emma, offer support. I refused almost all of it because I'd been trained that self-sufficiency was strength. It took my neighbor, Mrs. Morrison, the one I listed as Emma's emergency contact, to sit me down and explain that accepting help wasn't weakness. It was giving other people the gift of being useful when they felt helpless. That's a generous way to frame it. It's an accurate way to frame it. Daniel set down his fork, his gaze serious. When you nearly died, I had the skills to help. That gave me purpose in a moment that otherwise would have been terrifying. You accepting that help didn't make you weak. It made my strength matter. That's how community works, Lena. We all have different strengths, and we're all stronger when we allow those strengths to support each other. Lena wanted to argue, to find the flaw in his logic, to explain why her situation was different. But the truth was that she was sitting across from a man who'd saved her life and wanted nothing in return except to be left alone to raise his daughter. There was no ulterior motive, no hidden agenda, no calculation about future benefit, just a human being who'd helped another human being because he could. That kind of straightforward decency was so foreign to her world that it felt almost revolutionary. So here's my question, Lena said, decision crystallizing. If I want to acknowledge what you did in a way that respects your boundaries and Emma's privacy, what would that actually look like? Daniel took a long drink of coffee, clearly thinking through his answer carefully. Nothing public. Nothing that draws attention. Nothing that disrupts the life I've built. Okay, what would you accept? Honestly? Daniel met her eyes. Continue exactly what you're doing right now. See the people around you, make different choices. Build a better company culture where workers at every level feel valued. That would honor what happened far more than any public recognition. That's too abstract. Lena shook her head. I need something concrete, something that acknowledges the debt between us in a way that closes the loop, so you're not stuck with this hanging over your head. Daniel was quiet for so long that Lena thought she'd pushed too far again. Then he spoke, his voice careful. Emma's college fund is underfunded. Sarah's medical bills and funeral expenses ate through most of our savings. I'm rebuilding it slowly, but at current rates, by the time Emma turns 18, she'll have maybe 30% of what she needs for a state school. Done. Lena's response was immediate. I'll establish a trust that covers full tuition, room, board, and expenses for 4 years at whatever school she chooses. No strings attached, completely anonymous if you prefer. No, Daniel's voice was firm. I didn't tell you that to ask for money. You didn't ask, I'm offering. Lena leaned forward. Daniel, you saved my life. If there's a concrete way I can help secure Emma's future, why would you refuse that? Because it's too much. Because it creates an obligation. Because Emma doesn't need to grow up knowing her college education was paid for by someone her father saved. Daniel's jaw was tight. She needs to believe she earned her future through her own merit, not through my job or my past or some debt her father incurred. Lena started to argue, then stopped. She was approaching this wrong, trying to solve a problem with resources when Daniel had already told her that wasn't what mattered to him. She needed to think differently, to understand what he actually valued versus what she assumed he should want. What if it wasn't framed as payment, she said slowly. What if it was a scholarship program that Cross Enterprises established for children of veterans? Emma would have to apply, meet criteria, compete fairly. She'd earn it based on her own merit, but you'd know the opportunity exists partly because of what happened between us. Daniel considered this, his expression unreadable. That's a lot of infrastructure to build just to help one kid. Who said it would only help one kid? Lena felt the familiar rush of strategic thinking kicking in, but this time channeled towards something beyond profit. There are thousands of veterans in this city working jobs below their skill level because they're prioritizing stability over advancement, just like you. Their kids deserve opportunities. Why shouldn't Cross Enterprises invest in that? Because it's expensive and offers no return on investment. Daniel's response was automatic, probably repeating objections he'd heard from corporate leadership before. It offers exactly the return that matters, supporting families who've already sacrificed for this country. Lena's voice carried conviction. And frankly, if Cross Enterprises can't afford to invest in veteran families while maintaining profitability, then I've built the company wrong. Something shifted in Daniel's expression, a crack in the careful guardedness he'd maintained throughout the conversation. You're serious? Completely. Lena pulled out her phone, already making notes. I'll have Marcus draft a proposal for a veteran family scholarship program. Substantial funding, clear criteria, administered through an independent committee so there's no appearance of favoritism. Emma can apply when she's ready, along with any other qualifying students. She'll earn her spot fairly, but the opportunity will exist. That's not what I expected from this conversation. Daniel's voice carried something that might have been respect. What did you expect? That you'd cut me a check, I'd refuse it, and we'd both walk away feeling uncomfortable about unresolved obligations. His smile was slight but genuine. This is better. This actually means something beyond the two of us. That's the point. Lena set down her phone. You told me to make different choices, to see people, to build something better. A scholarship program for veteran families does all of that while also creating a structure that lasts beyond this moment. It's not about paying you back, Daniel. It's about paying forward in a way that honors what you represent. Daniel studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes serious. You understand that if you do this, people will ask questions. They'll want to know why suddenly Cross Enterprises is investing in veteran families. Some will figure out the connection to that night. Let them. Lena's voice was steady. The truth is that one of my employees saved my life, and it made me reevaluate how I run my company and treat the people who work there. That's not a scandal. It's a testament to the kind of culture I should have been building all along. You're going to get pushback from your board. I've gotten pushback from my board since day one, Lena smiled. The difference is that this time I'm fighting for something that actually matters, instead of just fighting to prove I belong in the room. Marie returned to clear the empty pie plates, glancing between them with obvious curiosity. You two figure out those world problems yet? Working on it, Daniel said. Rome wasn't built in a day. Neither was a decent piece of pie, but somehow I manage both. Marie winked at Lena. You take care of yourself, honey. Danny here's got good instincts about people. If he's taking time to talk to you, means you're worth the effort. After she left, Lena looked at Daniel with raised eyebrows. High praise. Marie's known me long enough to read me accurately. Daniel glanced at his watch, a basic model that probably cost less than the coffee Lena bought most mornings. I should get back. Emma will be wondering why I'm out so late on a school night. One more question before you go. Lena hesitated, then pushed forward. Do you regret it? Leaving medicine, stepping back from work that used your full skill set, accepting a position that most people would see as beneath your capabilities. Daniel stood, pulling out his wallet to leave cash for Marie despite the pie being on the house. Not for a second. I've watched Emma grow from a grieving 7-year-old into a smart, kind, curious 12-year-old who loves science and helps her classmates with homework and knows that her dad will always be there when she needs him. That's not a consolation prize, Lena. That's the whole point. He started to leave, then turned back. You asked what you learned from that night in the hallway. Here's what I learned. Even CEOs bleed. Even powerful people need help. Even someone who's built an empire can be reduced to their essential humanity by something as simple as a ruptured appendix. Maybe that's the real lesson. We're all just people trying to survive, and the structures we build around ourselves don't change that fundamental truth. Lena watched him walk away, watched him pause at the counter to say something that made Marie laugh, watched him push through the door into the night with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he valued. She sat alone in the booth for another 20 minutes, finishing her coffee and thinking about small choices that accumulated into different lives. about seeing people instead of functions, about building community instead of just building success. When she finally left Rosie's, she paused to introduce herself properly to Marie, learned that the older woman had worked the night shift for 32 years to be home with her kids during the day, learned that her grandson really was brilliant and headed for great things, learned that Marie had watched hundreds of people come through those doors over the decades and could read life stories in how they held their coffee cups. "You're going to be okay, honey," Marie said as Lena prepared to leave. "I can tell. You've got that look people get when they've decided to stop running from something and start running toward something instead." "What am I running toward?" "That's for you to figure out. But my guess?" Marie smiled with the wisdom of someone who'd served coffee to people at their best and worst. "You're running toward the person you're supposed to be instead of the person you thought you had to become. That's a good direction." Outside, the city was settling into its late-night rhythm. Lena stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the tall buildings that defined the downtown skyline, including Cross Enterprises Tower in the distance. From here, her empire was just one light among many, no more or less significant than the apartments where people like Daniel and Emma lived their lives in quiet dignity. The realization should have been humbling. Instead, it felt like permission to be human, to be imperfect, to measure success by metrics that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. Her phone buzzed with messages from Marcus, probably checking on how the meeting went. Lena ignored them for the moment, choosing instead to walk the 3 blocks to where her car was parked, paying attention to her surroundings in a way she usually didn't. She noticed the homeless veteran on the corner with a sign that mentioned service in Desert Storm. She noticed the late-night cleaning crew visible through the windows of an office building, working while the executives who employed them slept. She noticed the security guard at a residential high-rise, standing watch so residents could feel safe. All the invisible infrastructure that made her world possible. By the time Lena reached her car, she'd made several decisions. The Veteran Family Scholarship Program was happening, and it would be substantial enough to make a real difference. She was going to learn the names of every person who worked night shift in Cross Enterprises Tower, starting with security and cleaning staff. And she was going to have a conversation with Marcus about restructuring her schedule to include time for the kind of presence that Daniel had described. Showing up consistently, building relationships, being part of a community instead of just leading a company. Would it be easy? No. Would it feel awkward and uncomfortable at first? Probably. Would her board question whether she was losing her edge? Almost certainly. But Daniel Cole had saved her life with skills he'd learned in the worst circumstances imaginable, then walked away asking for nothing except to be left alone to raise his daughter. If he could sacrifice career prestige for what actually mattered, surely Lena could sacrifice some efficiency for humanity. She drove home through streets that suddenly felt less like a city she commanded and more like a community she was part of, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Lena Cross felt like she might be heading in the right direction. The next morning, she started with something small, arriving at the office at a normal hour instead of in the pre-dawn darkness. She took the elevator with other employees instead of using the executive lift. She made eye contact with the security guard at the front desk and read his name tag carefully. "Good morning, James. How are you today?" The surprise on his face that the CEO knew his name, cared enough to ask, told Lena everything she needed to know about how far she had to go. But at least now she was starting the journey, and sometimes, Daniel had told her, that was enough. James blinked twice before recovering his professional composure, but not before Lena caught the flash of genuine surprise crossing his features. He was probably mid-50s, with graying hair cut military short, and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd spent considerable time outdoors before taking an indoor position. "I'm doing well, Ms. Cross. Thank you for asking." His voice carried the careful neutrality of someone unused to executive attention. "Hope you're recovering well from your medical situation." "I am, thanks to good care and good timing." Lena paused, committing details to memory the way she would before a crucial negotiation. James had a small pin on his uniform lapel, a purple heart. Another veteran, another person whose service had probably been invisible to her until now. "How long have you been with Cross Enterprises, James?" "Coming up on 8 years this March, ma'am." He seemed uncertain whether this was small talk or some kind of test. "Been a good position? Stable hours? Decent benefits?" I'm glad to hear that. If there's ever anything that would make the job better, I hope you'll feel comfortable bringing it up through proper channels. Lena meant it, though she could see James didn't quite believe her. That was fine. Trust was earned through consistency, not declarations. Have a good day. You too, Ms. Cross. As Lena walked toward the main elevators, she noticed several other employees doing double takes at seeing their CEO using the public lifts instead of the executive express. In the elevator car, she found herself standing next to a young woman in an IT department polo shirt, clutching a large coffee and looking like she was running on 3 hours of sleep. Long night? Lena asked. The woman startled, nearly spilling her coffee. Oh, Miss Cross, I didn't... Yes, ma'am. Server migration. We had to do it overnight to minimize business disruption. I appreciate that dedication. Lena noticed the woman's name tag read Chen A. IT Infrastructure. The seamless technology experience doesn't happen by accident. Thank you for making it possible. The young woman, Amanda, Lena reminded herself to find out the full name, looked like she'd been handed an unexpected gift. Just doing my job, ma'am. And doing it well. The elevator dinged for the executive floor. As Lena stepped out, she glanced back. Make sure you get some sleep today, Amanda. The servers will still be there tomorrow. The doors closed on Amanda's surprised smile, and Lena continued to her office, already feeling the weight of how much had been invisible to her for so long. Every smooth operation, every perfectly functioning system, every clean floor and secured entrance, all of it required human effort that she'd taken for granted. Marcus was waiting in her office, 2 cups of premium coffee on the meeting table and a tablet loaded with what was undoubtedly the day's urgent priorities. He took one look at her face and set down the tablet with a knowing expression. You're going to upend everything, aren't you? Just the parts that need upending. Lena settled into her chair carefully, still mindful of healing incisions. Tell me about our employee recognition programs, specifically for service workers, security, facilities, IT infrastructure. How do we currently acknowledge their contributions? Marcus pulled up information on his tablet with practiced efficiency. Standard annual reviews, performance bonuses tied to building metrics, employee of the month recognition in the company newsletter. Why? Because I just thanked a security guard by name and an IT worker for overnight server migration, and both of them looked at me like I'd performed a miracle. Lena's voice carried frustration aimed at herself. That's not a functioning recognition system, Marcus. That's basic human decency being treated as extraordinary. To be fair, most executives don't interact with those departments directly. Marcus's tone suggested he knew he was defending the indefensible. The company has structural hierarchies for a reason. The reason being efficiency, not humanity. Lena opened her own laptop, already thinking through implications. I want you to set up listening sessions with representatives from every department, and I mean every department, including night shift cleaning crew and weekend security. I want to understand what we're doing well and what we're missing. Not through HR reports and filtered feedback, but through direct conversation. That's going to take considerable time away from operational priorities. Then operational priorities can wait. Lena's voice carried the certainty that had built her company. I nearly died 3 weeks ago, Marcus. It clarified some things about what actually matters versus what I've been treating as important. This falls into the actually matters category. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. This is about Daniel Cole, isn't it? About what happened that night. It's about what that night revealed. Lena met his gaze steadily. I built this company on ambition and drive and the belief that success justified any sacrifice. But I never stopped to question whether the sacrifices were necessary or if I was just following a playbook written by people who'd never examined their own assumptions. Daniel showed me a different way of measuring worth. Now I'm trying to figure out how to implement that here. By having coffee chats with facilities workers? Marcus's skepticism was gentle but present. By starting to see the people who make this company function and recognizing that their contributions matter beyond what shows up on quarterly reports. Lena pulled up her calendar, scanning the relentless parade of meetings and obligations. How much of my schedule is actually essential versus habitual? You want an honest answer or the one that makes me look like I'm managing your time well? Honest, always. Marcus leaned back, his expression suggesting he'd been waiting for this question for years. About 40% is essential. Board meetings, critical client relationships, strategic planning that actually requires your specific input. Another 30% is important but could be delegated to directors who are perfectly capable of handling it. The remaining 30% exists because you've never said no to being in the room, even when your presence adds minimal value. So I could reclaim potentially 60% of my time without compromising actual business outcomes? In theory. In practice, delegation requires trust, and you've built a company culture where everyone looks to you for final approval on everything from acquisition strategy to office furniture. Marcus's smile was wry. You're a victim of your own success at being indispensable. Then it's time to become dispensable in the right ways. Lena started marking calendar items for review. I want you to work with department heads on a delegation framework. Anything that doesn't require CEO-level authority or strategic insight gets pushed down to the people actually doing the work. I'll provide oversight and guidance, but I'm done being a bottleneck for decisions that should happen 3 levels below me. The board will have questions about this shift in focus. The board can ask them at the next meeting, and I'll have answers ready. Lena looked up from her laptop. Speaking of which, add the Veteran Family Scholarship Program to the agenda. I want full board approval and substantial funding allocated for the next fiscal year. Marcus pulled up notes on his tablet. I had the legal team draft a preliminary proposal based on your message last night. They're recommending a $5 million endowment to start, with annual funding of $500,000 for operational costs and scholarship awards. We could support approximately 20 full scholarships per year at that level. Double it. Lena's response was immediate. $10 million endowment, $1 million annual funding, 40 scholarships per year. And I want the application process to be genuinely accessible, not buried in corporate website bureaucracy. Partner with veteran service organizations, community colleges, high schools with significant military family populations. Make sure the people who need this program can actually find it. That's a significant commitment, Lena. The board is going to want to understand the ROI. The ROI is that we're investing in families who've already invested everything in this country. Sometimes the return is measured in lives changed rather than dollars earned. Lena's voice carried steel beneath the conviction. If the board can't understand that, then I've been surrounding myself with the wrong advisors. Marcus made notes, but his expression suggested approval rather than concern. You know, I had a conversation with my daughter last week. She's finishing her MBA, looking at career options. She asked me if I thought corporate success required sacrificing personal integrity. I didn't have a good answer for her. What would you tell her now? That it depends on who's setting the terms of success. Marcus looked up from his tablet. You're rewriting those terms, Lena. That takes courage most CEOs never develop. Or desperation. Lena's smile was self-aware. I'm realizing that the life I've built isn't sustainable, isn't satisfying, and isn't actually reflecting the values I thought I held. That's not courage. It's survival instinct kicking in before I hollow myself out completely. The conversation was interrupted by Lena's assistant, Jennifer, appearing in the doorway with an expression that suggested controlled urgency. Jennifer had been with Lena for 4 years, handled impossible scheduling demands with grace, and had probably forgotten more about Cross Enterprises operations than most executives would ever know. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation developing. Jennifer's voice was professionally calm. The Singapore acquisition team just sent an urgent request for video conference. They're citing concerns about your medical status affecting deal stability. Lena felt the familiar surge of frustration that came with being a young female CEO. Any sign of weakness, any hint of vulnerability, and suddenly her capability was questioned. She took a breath, forcing herself to approach this strategically rather than emotionally. When do they want to meet? Within the hour, if possible. Set it up for 45 minutes from now. That gives me time to review current deal terms and prepare appropriate responses. Lena glanced at Marcus. I'm going to need you on this call. They're probably testing whether my medical situation has affected decision-making capacity or board confidence. They're testing whether they can leverage your appendicitis to renegotiate terms, Marcus corrected, which is both insulting and, unfortunately, predictable. After Jennifer left to coordinate the video conference, Lena pulled up the Singapore acquisition files, scanning through negotiation history and current terms with the systematic focus that had made her successful. The deal was solid, beneficial for both parties, properly structured, with contingencies that protected all stakeholders. The Singapore team's sudden concern about her medical status was transparently a tactic to create uncertainty they could exploit. "They're worried I'll be distracted or weakened," Lena said, thinking out loud. "They want to know if my board is wavering, if there's internal instability they can use to extract concessions." Standard hardball tactics. Marcus was already pulling up supporting documentation. "How do you want to play it?" "With absolute honesty." Lena closed her laptop, decision made. "I'm going to tell them exactly what happened, that I had a medical emergency, received excellent care, and am fully recovered and engaged. I'm going to make it clear that my health status has zero impact on my capacity to lead this company or close this deal. And then I'm going to politely suggest that if they're looking for weakness to exploit, they're going to be disappointed, and we can all save time by proceeding with the terms as negotiated. That's a risk. Showing any vulnerability is human." Lena's voice was firm. "I'm done pretending that CEOs don't get sick, don't need help, don't experience the same physical limitations as everyone else. If the Singapore team can't handle the reality that I'm a human being who had a ruptured appendix and recovered, then maybe they're not the partners we want for a long-term strategic relationship." Marcus's expression shifted into something that might have been pride. "You're really doing this, rewriting the entire playbook." "Someone has to." Lena stood, testing her stamina after the morning's activity. The incisions pulled but held, healing properly, getting stronger. "Set up the conference room. Let's show Singapore exactly what they're dealing with." The video conference 45 minutes later confirmed Lena's suspicions. The Singapore team, led by Chairman Wei Chen, opened with elaborate concerns about her health, questions about board stability, and thinly veiled suggestions that perhaps more time was needed to ensure all parties were operating from positions of strength. Lena let them finish, then leaned forward into the camera with the direct gaze that had served her well in countless negotiations. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate your concern for my well-being. Let me address this clearly so we can move forward productively. 3 weeks ago, I experienced a ruptured appendix that required emergency surgery. The medical situation was serious, but was handled effectively thanks to excellent care. I'm now fully recovered, fully engaged, and completely capable of executing on all commitments Cross Enterprises has made." She paused, letting that sink in, watching Chen's carefully neutral expression for micro-reactions. "If your concern is genuine medical interest, I thank you for it. If your concern is strategic testing to identify potential weaknesses you can leverage, I'll save you time. There are none. My board is unified, my company is strong, and the terms we've negotiated represent fair value for all parties. If you'd like to proceed on that basis, excellent. If you prefer to waste time manufacturing concerns about my appendix, perhaps we should reevaluate whether this partnership serves mutual interests." The silence on the other end of the video connection stretched for 5 seconds, an eternity in negotiation terms. Then Wei Chen's face shifted into something that might have been respect or resignation. "Ms. Cross, you have always been direct. I appreciate that quality." His English was impeccable, his tone carefully modulated. "Our board had questions. You have answered them clearly. Shall we proceed with finalizing acquisition terms?" The rest of the call was purely technical, reviewing timelines, confirming regulatory compliance processes, establishing communication protocols for the integration phase. By the time they disconnected 90 minutes later, the deal was back on track, stronger for having weathered the attempted power play. Marcus waited until the video screen went dark before speaking. That was either brilliant or reckless. Probably both. Lena felt the adrenaline of confrontation fading, leaving behind the familiar exhaustion of high-stakes negotiation. "But I'm tired of playing defense about being human. If business partners can't handle the reality that executives occasionally get sick, they're going to struggle with every other reality of long-term partnership. The board is going to hear about this. Chen will make sure of it, one way or another." "Good. Let them hear that their CEO handles challenges directly instead of hiding behind corporate doublespeak." Lena gathered her materials, her mind already moving to the next priority. "Speaking of the board, I want to schedule individual conversations with each member before the next full meeting. I need to understand where they stand on the changes I'm implementing. That's a lot of time investment for what amounts to managing personalities. It's a necessary investment in ensuring I have the support to make meaningful changes. Lena's voice carried the weight of experience. I've watched too many good initiatives die because the groundwork wasn't laid properly. I won't make that mistake here. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern that felt simultaneously exhausting and energizing. Lena restructured her schedule around the listening sessions she'd requested, meeting with representatives from every department level in small groups where hierarchy could be temporarily suspended in favor of honest dialogue. The conversations were revelatory in ways both encouraging and uncomfortable. The day shift security team talked about feeling invisible except when something went wrong. The IT infrastructure group discussed being treated as cost centers rather than essential enablers. The facilities crew shared stories of working around executive meetings, cleaning offices while pretending not to exist, making themselves invisible because visibility meant being seen as interruptions. Through it all, patterns emerged. People wanted to be acknowledged, to have their expertise recognized, to understand how their work connected to larger company goals. They wanted reasonable schedules that didn't assume unlimited availability. They wanted to feel like their presence mattered beyond the functions they performed. Lena took notes in every session, asked questions, and resisted the urge to immediately problem solve. Daniel had told her that showing up consistently and listening mattered more than quick fixes. She was learning that lesson repeatedly, discovering that sometimes the most valuable thing she could offer was attention rather than solutions. 3 weeks after her conversation with Daniel at Rosie's Diner, Lena was reviewing notes from that day's listening session when Jennifer appeared with an expression that suggested something unusual had happened. "There's a situation on the plaza level." Jennifer's voice was carefully neutral. "Security called. There's been a medical emergency, one of the guests at the charity gala. They're requesting your presence." Lena's blood ran cold. Cross Enterprises was hosting a major charity fundraiser that evening. Hundreds of donors and community leaders gathered in the renovated plaza space that served as the building's public face. A medical emergency in the middle of that event could become a PR nightmare, but more immediately, it meant someone needed help. "Call 911 if they haven't already. I'm heading down now." Lena was already moving, Jennifer falling into step beside her with phone in hand, relaying updates. "Paramedics are en route. ETA 6 minutes. The guest, a Mr. Richard Hartman, collapsed during the cocktail hour. He's unconscious but breathing. Our security team has cleared space and is managing crowd control." The elevator ride down felt interminable. Lena's mind was racing through implications, responsibilities, potential outcomes. Richard Hartman was a major donor, a community fixture, someone whose medical crisis at her event could have repercussions far beyond the immediate emergency. But beneath the strategic thinking was something more fundamental. Someone needed help, and she was the person in charge. Whatever came next, she had to be present for it. The plaza level was controlled chaos. Lena could see the gala in the main space beyond. Elegant attire, soft lighting, the kind of carefully curated event that Cross Enterprises had perfected. But in the entrance atrium, a different scene was unfolding. Richard Hartman, distinguished philanthropist in his mid-60s, was lying on the marble floor with security personnel keeping bystanders at a respectful distance. One guard was monitoring his pulse, while another was on the phone with emergency services. And kneeling beside Hartman, working with swift efficiency to establish an airway and check vitals, was Daniel Cole. Lena's steps faltered for just a moment, surprise and recognition colliding. Daniel was in civilian clothes, dark slacks, white button-down shirt, probably attending the gala as a member of the community rather than as security staff. But he'd clearly dropped whatever he was doing to respond to the emergency with the same instincts that had saved Lena's life weeks earlier. She crossed the space quickly, staying out of Daniel's way but making her presence known. "What's the situation?" Daniel glanced up, recognition flashing across his features before his focus returned to his patient. "Cardiac event, probably myocardial infarction based on presentation. He's got a pulse, but it's weak and irregular. Breathing is shallow. I've got him positioned to optimize blood flow, but he needs emergency cardiac care immediately." One of the security guards, James, Lena recognized from morning greetings, spoke up. "Paramedics are 3 minutes out, Ms. Cross. Mr. Cole took over the moment Mr. Hartman collapsed. We'd barely started assessment when he was already running intervention. Because every second matters with cardiac events. Daniel's hands were moving as he spoke, checking pupil response, monitoring breathing patterns, his entire being focused on keeping Richard Hartman alive until professional help arrived. He needs aspirin if we have it, helps with blood clotting, and someone should find his wife, let her know what's happening without causing panic. Lena turned to Jennifer, who was already moving. Get aspirin from the first aid station. Find Mrs. Hartman and bring her here with someone from the gala staff who can provide support. As Jennifer coordinated responses, Lena knelt on the other side of Richard Hartman, staying out of Daniel's way but wanting to be present. Up close, she could see the older man's gray pallor, the labored breathing, the slight tremor that suggested his body was fighting desperately to maintain function. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked quietly. "Talk to him." Daniel's voice was calm, instructive. "He might be able to hear even if he can't respond. Let him know help is coming, that he's not alone. Gives the brain something to hold on to." Lena leaned closer to Hartman's ear, keeping her voice steady and reassuring. "Mr. Hartman, it's Lena Cross. You're at Cross Enterprises, and we have excellent help here. Paramedics are almost here. Your wife is being brought to you. You're going to be okay." She had no idea if any of that was true, if Richard Hartman would survive this, but Daniel had said to give him something to hold on to. Hope was better than silence. The next 2 minutes stretched impossibly. Daniel maintained his assessment and positioning, his hands steady, his voice calm as he updated the security team on status changes. Lena continued her quiet reassurance to Hartman, anchoring him with words even as his body fought its internal battle. Around them, the gala continued in ignorant celebration, music and laughter providing surreal counterpoint to the life and death drama unfolding in the atrium. Then paramedics burst through the entrance with equipment and authority, taking in the scene with professional speed. Daniel delivered a rapid-fire report, symptoms, timeline, interventions, current status, in language that made clear his medical background. The lead paramedic, a woman in her 40s with competent eyes, absorbed the information with nods. "Good work keeping him stable. We'll take it from here." She was already moving, her team deploying equipment with practiced coordination. "You medical?" "Former Army combat medic. Been out for a while." Daniel stepped back, giving them room to work, but his gaze never left Hartman. Within minutes, Richard Hartman was on a gurney, oxygen masks secured, IV lines established, vital signs being monitored by portable equipment. Mrs. Hartman appeared just as they were preparing to move him, her elegant evening wear and carefully styled hair at odds with the terror in her eyes. "Richard!" She rushed forward, but one of the paramedics gently intercepted her. "Ma'am, your husband has suffered a cardiac event. We're taking him to St. Catherine's Hospital immediately. You can ride with us, but we need to move now." Mrs. Hartman nodded numbly, her hand finding her husband's and gripping it like a lifeline. As they wheeled him toward the waiting ambulance, she looked back at Daniel with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. Whatever you did, thank you." Then they were gone, sirens wailing as the ambulance pulled away from the building, leaving behind a small crowd of witnesses and the echoing aftermath of emergency. Daniel stood in the center of the atrium, his white shirt marked with signs of medical intervention. His expression distant in the way Lena was beginning to recognize meant he was processing trauma through trained detachment. Around them, security was beginning to manage the gathered crowd, ushering curious onlookers back to the gala while maintaining professional calm. Lena approached Daniel carefully, aware that he was probably not in a place to appreciate attention. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." The words came automatically, probably delivered 1,000 times in 1,000 similar situations. Then his gray eyes focused on her and something shifted. "Is this going to be a pattern? Me showing up when you're hosting events and someone needs emergency medical care?" The attempt at humor was clearly a defense mechanism, but Lena played along. "I sincerely hope not. My insurance premiums are already high enough." She glanced at his shirt, stained and wrinkled from the intervention. "You responded immediately. Didn't hesitate. Training doesn't turn off just because you change careers." Daniel's voice was flat, exhausted. Someone needed help. I had the skills, basic calculus. That's what you said about me. But this time, there were other people around. Security staff, gala attendees, plenty of potential helpers. You still chose to get involved. Because I'm the one who'd know what to do while everyone else was still processing what happened. Daniel's jaw tightened. Richard Hartman is someone's husband, probably someone's father. He gets to go home to them because I remembered how to manage cardiac emergencies. That's not heroism, Lena. That's basic human responsibility. Before Lena could respond, a commotion at the gala entrance drew their attention. Several board members were emerging, undoubtedly having heard about the medical emergency and coming to assess implications for the event. Leading them was Charles Morrison, the board's senior member, and Lena's most consistent source of strategic challenge. Charles took in the scene with sharp eyes, the disrupted atrium, the security presence. Lena standing with a man in rumpled clothing marked with evidence of medical intervention. His expression suggested he was calculating political implications even as he approached. Lena, we need to discuss how to handle this situation. The donors are concerned and we need a coordinated communication strategy. His gaze flicked to Daniel dismissively. Perhaps we should move this to a private space. In a moment, Lena's voice carried the authority that made subordinates pause. Charles, this is Daniel Cole. He's the person who kept Richard Hartman alive until paramedics arrived. Daniel, this is Charles Morrison, senior member of our board. Charles extended his hand with practiced politician's grace, but Lena caught the calculation in his eyes. We're grateful for your quick response, Mr. Cole. I'm sure the company will want to acknowledge your assistance appropriately. Not necessary. Daniel's handshake was brief, professional, clearly wanting to disengage. Daniel is also the person who saved my life 3 weeks ago. Lena's voice cut across whatever deflection Daniel was preparing. When I collapsed from a ruptured appendix, he's the one who kept me alive until emergency services arrived. Tonight, he did the same for Richard Hartman. So when the board discusses how to acknowledge this, I suggest we start by recognizing that we have someone in our community whose presence at our event seems to coincide with people not dying. That strikes me as worth noting. Charles's expression shifted through several rapid calculations. I wasn't aware of your involvement in Lena's medical situation, Mr. Cole. That certainly adds context. It doesn't need context. Daniel's voice hardened slightly. I helped 2 people who needed help. That's the entire story. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a daughter at home who's going to wonder why I'm late. He started to leave, but Lena stepped into his path. Wait, please. Just 1 minute. Daniel stopped, his expression suggesting patience stretched thin. What? You can't keep doing this. Lena kept her voice low, aware of Charles and other board members watching. You can't keep saving lives and then disappearing into anonymity. It's not sustainable, and it's not fair to you. What's not sustainable is being in the spotlight. Daniel's voice carried an edge of frustration. I came to a charity gala because Emma's science teacher suggested it would be good for her to see community engagement. I wore my one decent shirt, wrote a check I could barely afford, and tried to be a good citizen. Then someone collapsed and I did what I was trained to do. That doesn't make me special, Lena. It makes me someone with useful skills who happened to be in the right place. Twice? Coincidence. At some point, coincidence becomes pattern. Lena was aware they were drawing attention, aware this conversation should happen privately, but something in Daniel's expression suggested if he left now, he'd find a way to avoid this discussion permanently. You told me at Rosie's that you carry the names of people you couldn't save. Tonight you saved someone. That has to mean something. Daniel's face went carefully blank, the wall she'd seen him raise in moments of emotional exposure slamming back into place. What it means is that Richard Hartman gets to go home to his wife. Everything else is noise. Charles cleared his throat, stepping closer with the smooth intervention of someone accustomed to managing difficult conversations. Perhaps we should continue this discussion after emotions have settled. Mr. Cole, I'd like to extend a formal invitation to meet with the board next week. We'd like to properly understand tonight's events and discuss appropriate recognition. I decline. Daniel's response was immediate. I appreciate the gesture, but I'm not interested in formal recognition or board meetings. I'm interested in going home to my daughter and explaining why Daddy's shirt is covered in someone else's medical emergency. He moved past them before anyone could object further, crossing the atrium with long strides that suggested barely controlled urgency to escape. Lena watched him go, frustration and concern warring in her chest. Daniel was running again, retreating from attention the same way he had after saving her life. The difference was that this time, he'd done it publicly, in front of hundreds of witnesses, during an event that would be discussed and analyzed in ways he couldn't control. Charles turned to Lena with an expression that suggested they needed to talk immediately. Your office, now. The board meeting that followed was tense and multifaceted. Charles, along with 3 other board members who'd been at the gala, wanted to understand exactly what had happened, why Lena hadn't disclosed Daniel's role in her own medical emergency earlier, and what implications tonight's events carried for the company's relationship with the community and donors. Lena laid it out clearly. Daniel Cole was a decorated combat medic turned security guard turned community member who'd saved 2 lives associated with Cross Enterprises in the span of 3 weeks. He wanted no recognition, no publicity, no disruption to his carefully maintained private life. The company owed him enormous debt but needed to respect his boundaries. That's not sustainable. Charles's voice carried the weight of decades in boardrooms. Richard Hartman is going to want to thank him publicly. The press is going to want the human interest angle. You can't protect someone's privacy when they keep performing public heroics. Then we manage it carefully. Lena's voice was firm. We acknowledge that someone at the event had medical training and provided assistance. We don't name names. We don't provide details beyond what's necessary for transparency. If Richard wants to express private gratitude, we facilitate that while protecting Daniel's boundaries. But we don't throw him to media wolves because it makes a good story. The board has fiduciary responsibility to manage company reputation. Another board member, Patricia Chen, spoke up with lawyerly precision. A story about Cross Enterprises events featuring medical emergencies where unnamed heroes save the day is going to generate questions. Media pressure will eventually identify Mr. Cole, regardless of our intentions. We should get ahead of that narrative. No. Lena's response was absolute. We respect Daniel's choice, even if it's inconvenient for our narrative management. He's not a PR asset to be deployed. He's a human being who's made his preferences clear. The conversation continued for another hour, circling around questions of responsibility, reputation, and respect. By the time the board members finally dispersed, Lena was exhausted and frustrated, and increasingly certain that Daniel's worst fears about attention were about to be realized regardless of her efforts to prevent them. She was right. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Not through any official Cross Enterprises channels, but through social media posts from gala attendees, through Richard Hartman's son posting grateful updates about his father's condition and mentioning the hero who'd saved him, through the networked gossip that made privacy increasingly impossible in the age of constant documentation. Daniel Cole's name was attached to the story within hours, along with photos from the gala showing him kneeling beside Richard Hartman, focused and competent in a way that contrasted dramatically with his rumpled civilian appearance. Someone had dug up his military service record. Someone else had connected him to Lena's own medical emergency weeks earlier. By noon, 3 news outlets were calling Cross Enterprises requesting interviews with the hero security guard. By evening, Daniel's apartment building was being staked out by a local news crew hoping for a comment. Lena watched it unfold with growing horror and guilt, knowing that every fear Daniel had expressed about publicity was being realized in real time. She'd promised to protect his privacy, but the reality was that once he'd stepped into public view, that protection had become impossible. She tried calling him multiple times. The calls went straight to voicemail. She sent messages that went unread. She even dispatched Marcus to Daniel's apartment with an apology and an offer to help manage the media attention. But Marcus returned with the report that Daniel had refused to open the door and had asked, through the closed door, to be left alone. 3 days after the gala, Lena received a message that stopped her cold. It came through official building security channels, a simple email that felt like a severing. Ms. Cross, please accept this as my formal resignation from Cross Enterprises, effective immediately. I appreciate the opportunity to serve, but have determined that continued employment is not compatible with my family's needs. I wish you and the company every success. Daniel Cole. Lena stared at the words, feeling something crack in her chest. She'd done exactly what Daniel had feared most. Pulled him into visibility, disrupted his carefully maintained anonymity, forced him back into the public eye he'd deliberately left behind. She'd meant to honor him. Instead, she'd destroyed the quiet life he'd built for Emma. The realization sat heavy and bitter, and Lena found herself back at Rosie's diner at 9 p.m., hoping against hope that Daniel would show up for a conversation she had no right to expect. He didn't come. But Marie did, sliding into the booth across from her with coffee and the kind expression of someone who'd been watching this drama unfold from the edges. "He's not coming tonight, honey." Marie's voice was gentle. "Danny's in protective mode right now. That means circle the wagons and shut out everything that threatens his daughter's stability." "I ruined his life." Lena's voice came out hollow. "I promised to respect his boundaries, and instead I created exactly the situation he was trying to avoid." "You didn't create anything." Marie poured coffee for both of them. "Danny created this by being the kind of person who can't walk past someone who needs help. That's on him, not you. The question is what happens next." "I don't know." Lena wrapped her hands around the coffee mug. "He won't talk to me. He's resigned. I've destroyed the trust we were building." Marie studied her with eyes that had seen decades of human drama play out across diner tables. "You want to know what I think? I think Danny's scared. Not of the attention, but of what the attention represents. He built a life where he controls all the variables, where Emma's world is stable and predictable. Now it's not, and he's doing what he always does when things get unpredictable: tactical withdrawal. So I just wait for him to stop running? No. You give him space, but you also make it clear the space isn't rejection." Marie's voice carried hard-won wisdom. "Danny spent years in situations where, if you weren't useful, you were forgotten. His worst fear isn't attention, it's being used and then discarded. You show him that's not what this is." "How?" "By doing what you said you'd do, by changing how you run that company, by making the scholarship program real, by showing him through action that this isn't about leveraging his story for your benefit." Marie smiled. "And maybe by stopping by here in a couple weeks when he's had time to realize the world didn't actually end just because people noticed him." Lena left the diner with more questions than answers, but also with something that felt like a path forward. She couldn't undo the publicity. She couldn't restore Daniel's anonymity, but she could prove through sustained action that her intentions had been genuine, that the changes she'd committed to weren't contingent on his participation or cooperation. Over the next 2 weeks, Lena threw herself into the work Daniel had inspired. The listening sessions continued, generating recommendations for policy changes that actually addressed employee concerns. The Veteran Family Scholarship Program moved from proposal to funded reality, with announcements going to every military family advocacy organization in the region. She restructured her schedule to be more present and less reactive, making time for the connections that had been invisible to her before. And she waited, hoping that Daniel would eventually see that she'd meant what she said, that this transformation wasn't about him. It was because of him. But it belonged to her now. Richard Hartman recovered fully, his cardiac event caught early enough to prevent permanent damage. He called Lena personally to thank her and to ask how he could properly acknowledge Daniel Cole's intervention. Lena gave him Daniel's address, with the caveat that any contact should be private and respectful of his family's privacy. What happened between them, she never learned. But 2 weeks after the gala, Daniel Cole quietly resumed working night security at Cross Enterprises Tower, his resignation apparently rescinded or ignored. Lena saw him from a distance once, walking rounds on the executive level late one evening when she was working late. They made eye contact across the hallway. Daniel nodded once, acknowledging her presence without approaching. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for now, Lena decided something was enough to build on. The nod became a pattern over the following weeks. Lena would work late, and Daniel would make his security rounds, and they would acknowledge each other with that single gesture: recognition without engagement, respect without intrusion. It was a fragile détente, and Lena understood that pushing for more would shatter whatever trust remained between them. Instead, she focused on the work. The Veteran Family Scholarship Program launched with a quiet press release that emphasized Cross Enterprises' commitment to military families without mentioning Daniel's name or the circumstances that had inspired it. Within days, applications began arriving, carefully written essays from high school seniors whose parents had served, from younger siblings of veterans, from children of active duty personnel who dreamed of college but faced financial barriers. Lena read every application personally, a task Marcus gently suggested she delegate. She refused. These weren't just forms to be processed. They were stories of sacrifice and resilience that deserved to be witnessed. A girl whose father had lost his legs in Afghanistan but still coached her soccer team. A boy whose mother was deployed overseas for the third time, missing his senior year but making him fiercely proud. A young woman whose veteran father worked 2 jobs to support the family, including night security at a downtown office building. That last application stopped Lena cold. The details were different enough that it couldn't be Emma Cole. The father worked at a different building, the daughter was a year older, but the parallels were unmistakable. How many Daniel Coles were out there, working beneath their capabilities to provide stability for their children, watching their kids dream of futures they couldn't quite afford to give them? The scholarship program could help 40 students per year. It was substantial, meaningful, and completely inadequate to the scope of the need. Lena found herself strategizing expansion plans, running financial models on how cross-enterprises could scale the program without compromising operational stability. "You're becoming obsessed with this," Marcus delivered the observation during their weekly strategy meeting, his tone more concerned than critical. The scholarship program is running well. The employee engagement initiatives are showing measurable improvement. You've restructured your leadership approach in ways that are generating positive feedback. At some point, you need to trust the systems you've built and stop trying to personally solve every problem. "I'm not trying to solve every problem." Lena pulled up the application she'd been reviewing, turning her laptop so Marcus could see. "I'm trying to understand the scope of what we're addressing. This applicant, her father is a decorated Navy veteran working security at the Hartman building. His daughter wants to study engineering, but the family can't afford it. We could help her, Marcus. We could help hundreds like her. Why would we not pursue that aggressively?" "Because you're one person leading a company with finite resources and competing priorities." Marcus's voice carried the firmness of someone who'd watched Lena burn herself out before. "The scholarship program is important. It's not the only thing that's important. You need to maintain perspective." "Perspective is exactly what I'm maintaining." Lena closed the laptop, meeting Marcus's gaze directly. "For years, I optimized for profit and growth at the expense of everything else. Now I'm optimizing for different metrics, and you're concerned I'm overcompensating. Maybe I am, but I'd rather overcompensate toward humanity than continue undervaluing it." Marcus was quiet for a moment, his expression shifting through calculations that probably involved risk assessment and board management strategies. Then he leaned back with a sigh that suggested capitulation. "Fine. What do you want to do?" "I want to expand the scholarship program to 100 students per year within 3 years. I want to establish partnerships with other tech companies to create industry-wide support for veteran families. And I want to launch a jobs program that actively recruits veterans for positions matching their skills, not just entry-level roles they're overqualified for." Lena's voice carried the conviction that had built her company. "Daniel Cole is a decorated combat medic working night security because he prioritized stability over recognition. That's a systemic failure, Marcus. We can't fix the whole system, but we can fix our part of it. The board will want to see ROI projections. Then tell them the ROI is measured in lives changed and communities strengthened. If that's not sufficient justification, then we need different board members." Lena softened her tone slightly, recognizing Marcus's position as intermediary between her vision and board pragmatism. "I'm not being reckless with company resources. I'm being intentional about company values. There's a difference." "I'll draft the proposal." Marcus made notes on his tablet. "But Lena, you need to understand that this level of commitment is going to generate questions about motivation. Some board members already think your near-death experience affected your judgment. Doubling down on initiatives inspired by that experience is going to reinforce those concerns." "Let them question." Lena's voice was steady. "My judgment has improved, not deteriorated. I'm finally running this company with the values I claim to hold instead of just pursuing growth for its own sake. If the board can't support that evolution, then we're going to have some difficult conversations about leadership direction. The implicit threat hung between them, that Lena was prepared to fight the board on this, potentially even risk her position, rather than retreat to the purely profit-driven approach that had defined Cross Enterprises' first years. It was a dramatic shift, and Marcus's expression suggested he was still calculating whether it represented strength or vulnerability. Before he could respond, Jennifer appeared in the doorway with an expression that suggested something unusual had occurred. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone in the lobby asking to see you. He doesn't have an appointment and he refused to state his business with reception, but he was quite insistent that you'd want to know he was here." "Who is it?" "Daniel Cole." The name landed like electricity in the room. Lena felt her pulse spike, surprise and anticipation colliding. After weeks of careful distance, of wordless nods and respected boundaries, Daniel had voluntarily come to her office during business hours, a dramatic departure from his pattern of maintaining separation between his work life and any interaction with her. "Send him up." Lena was already standing, smoothing her suit jacket with hands that wanted to shake. "Marcus, we'll continue this later." Marcus gathered his materials with a knowing expression. "Good luck. Something tells me this conversation is going to be important." After he left, Lena had 3 minutes alone to try to calm her racing thoughts. Why was Daniel here? Had something happened with Emma? Was he finally ready to accept proper recognition for saving Richard Hartman? Or was this something else entirely? A confrontation about the publicity he'd feared, a final severing of whatever connection had formed between them. When Jennifer ushered Daniel into her office, Lena's first observation was that he looked tired. Not physically exhausted, but emotionally worn in the way that suggested he'd been wrestling with something difficult for considerable time. He was in his security uniform, suggesting he'd come directly from a shift, and he held a manila envelope in one hand with the careful grip of someone carrying something significant. "Daniel." Lena gestured to the seating area by the window, choosing informal space rather than putting her desk between them. "Thank you for coming. Please sit down. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine." Daniel remained standing for a moment, his gray eyes scanning her office with the systematic assessment she recognized from security training. Then he moved to the chair she'd indicated, sitting with the controlled precision of someone maintaining composure through discipline. "I'm interrupting your workday. I'll try to keep this brief." "You're not interrupting anything that matters more than this conversation." Lena settled into the chair across from him, maintaining open posture despite her internal tension. "I'm glad you're here. I've wanted to talk to you since the gala, but I knew you needed space." "About that." Daniel set the manila envelope on the table between them. "I owe you an apology for running, for the silent treatment, for making you feel responsible for something that wasn't your fault. The publicity after the gala, that wasn't on you, Lena. That was the inevitable consequence of me choosing to help someone in front of hundreds of witnesses." The apology caught Lena off guard. She'd expected defensiveness, maybe anger, possibly another explanation about maintaining boundaries. Instead, Daniel was taking responsibility for his own choices with the same directness he'd shown in every interaction. "I still could have managed it better." Lena's voice was quiet. "I promised to protect your privacy, and then circumstances made that impossible. I felt like I'd betrayed your trust." "You kept your promises as much as circumstances allowed." Daniel's gaze was steady. "The scholarship program launched without using my name or story. The company's statements about the gala acknowledged assistance without identifying me specifically. You did everything you said you'd do. What happened after that was beyond your control. You still had to deal with reporters at your building. Emma had to deal with attention at school. Your quiet life got disrupted exactly the way you feared." Lena heard the guilt in her own voice. "I understand why you ran." "I ran because I was scared." Daniel's admission was matter-of-fact, delivered without self-pity. Not of the attention, but of what it represented. "For 6 years, I've controlled every variable in Emma's life, where we live, what school she attends, who we interact with, how visible we are. The publicity meant loss of control, and I responded the way I was trained. Tactical withdrawal, secure the perimeter, eliminate the threat." "I'm not a threat, Daniel." "I know that now. Took me a couple weeks of watching Emma handle the situation with more grace than I did to realize I was the one making it a crisis. Something that might have been self-deprecating humor flickered across his face. 12-year-olds are apparently more adaptable than 38-year-old former combat medics. She fielded questions from classmates about her hero dad like it was no big deal, told them it was just what he used to do for work, and went back to being excited about her science project. Meanwhile, I was treating media attention like an incoming mortar strike. She sounds remarkable. She is. Gets that from her mother. Daniel's voice softened when he mentioned his late wife. Sarah would have handled all this better than I did. She'd have found the balance between acknowledging what happened and maintaining our privacy. I just panicked and ran. Lena wanted to reach across the space between them, to offer comfort or connection, but she kept her hands in her lap. You're being too hard on yourself. Protecting Emma is your priority. That's not weakness. It's not strength when it makes me act irrationally. Daniel picked up the manila envelope, holding it carefully. Which brings me to why I'm here. This contains something I should have given you weeks ago, but I was too caught up in maintaining control to see clearly. He handed her the envelope. Lena opened it carefully, pulling out what appeared to be a handwritten letter on lined notebook paper, the writing careful and young. As she began reading, she realized it was from Emma. Dear Ms. Cross, the letter began. My dad told me you're the lady he helped when you got sick, and that you've been trying to thank him, but he keeps saying it's not necessary. I wanted to write to you because I think there are things my dad won't say himself because he's too modest or too worried about bothering you. My dad is the best person I know. When my mom got sick, he took care of both of us and never once made me feel like I was a burden. After she died, he changed his whole career so he could be there for me, picking me up from school, helping with homework, making sure I had a stable life, even though I know he misses doing the medical work he trained for. Sometimes I hear him on the phone turning down job opportunities that would pay more or use his skills better, and he always says the same thing. Emma comes first. I'm writing this because I want you to know that when my dad helped you, he wasn't just doing his job. He was being who he is, someone who puts other people first, even when it costs him something. I think that's worth more than he'll ever admit. So if you really want to thank him, maybe you could help him see that what he did matters, that being good at helping people doesn't have to mean sacrificing everything else. Thank you for trying to acknowledge my dad. Even if he won't accept it, I want him to know someone noticed. Sincerely, Emma Cole. Lena read the letter twice, feeling something crack in her chest. The maturity in Emma's words, the clear-eyed understanding of her father's sacrifices, the gentle advocacy for someone who would never advocate for himself. It painted a picture of a relationship built on deep mutual love and respect. When she looked up, Daniel was watching her with an expression that suggested both pride and vulnerability. She wrote that without my permission, left it on my pillow 2 nights ago with a note saying I should give it to you. At first I was angry. She'd violated the boundary I'd set about keeping her out of this situation. Then I actually read what she wrote. She loves you very much. Lena's voice came out thick with emotion. And she sees you clearly, Daniel. Every sacrifice, every choice you've made for her benefit. She's 12. She shouldn't have to think about my sacrifices. Daniel's jaw tightened. She should be worried about school projects and which movie to watch on Friday nights, not whether her father is giving up too much for her sake. She's worried about it because she's your daughter, smart, observant, and caring enough to recognize what you've done for her. Lena set the letter down carefully. The question is whether she's right. Have you been sacrificing too much? Not for Emma's sake, but for your own? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the window where the city spread out below them in afternoon light. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of truths he'd probably been avoiding. I told myself the security job was temporary, that once Emma was older, more independent, I could return to medical work. But the truth is, I'm scared. Scared that I've lost the edge, that too much time has passed, that I'll make mistakes because I'm not sharp anymore. Or scared that if you admit you miss it, you're somehow betraying Emma by wanting something for yourself? Daniel's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features. That's uncomfortably accurate. It's also completely human. Lena leaned forward slightly. Daniel, you told me that every person we encounter is living a life as complex as our own, with dreams and struggles that matter. That includes you. Your dreams matter. Your professional fulfillment matters. The fact that you're also a devoted father doesn't erase your right to want more than just security rounds and weekend breakfasts at Rosie's. Easy to say, harder to implement when implementation means risk. Everything worth doing involves risk. Lena heard her own words and recognized them as something she'd learned from Daniel himself, that growth required stepping beyond comfortable boundaries. The question is whether the risk is worth the potential reward. Only you can answer that. Daniel picked up Emma's letter, reading it again with the careful attention of someone examining evidence. She wants me to be happy, not just present, but actually fulfilled. I've been so focused on stability that I forgot fulfillment was part of the equation. So, what would fulfillment look like? Lena kept her voice gentle, not pushing, but creating space for possibility. If you could design your ideal situation, one that kept Emma's stability intact, but also honored your own needs and capabilities, what would that be? The question hung in the air while Daniel processed it, his expression cycling through consideration and calculation. Finally, he spoke slowly, testing out thoughts he might not have fully articulated even to himself. I'd want to use my medical training again. Not full-time emergency medicine, the hours and stress aren't compatible with Emma's needs. But something clinical, something where I'm directly helping people with the skills I spent years developing. Community health clinic, maybe. Urgent care on a part-time basis. Something that lets me practice medicine while maintaining the schedule stability Emma needs. That sounds like a reasonable goal. Lena was already thinking strategically, seeing possibilities. Cross Enterprises has relationships with several community health organizations through our corporate responsibility initiatives. I could make introductions, help facilitate conversations about positions that might match your requirements. I don't want charity. The words came out sharper than probably intended, defensive instinct kicking in. I don't want a job because the CEO owes me a debt. I want to earn a position based on my qualifications and current capabilities. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering networking facilitation. Lena kept her voice level. You have skills that community health organizations desperately need. I have connections that could help you find organizations aligned with your needs. That's not debt payment. It's efficient resource matching. You'd still have to interview, demonstrate capability, earn the position on merit. Daniel studied her with the intensity that suggested he was evaluating not just her words, but her intentions. Why? Why do you keep pushing to help when I keep pushing back? The question deserved honesty. Lena took a breath, organizing thoughts she'd been carrying for weeks. Because that night in the hallway, you treated me like I mattered, not because of my position or wealth or influence, but because I was a human being who needed help. You saw me when I'd spent years making myself invisible behind corporate armor. That changed something in me, Daniel. Made me want to be someone who sees people the way you do, who helps when I can, regardless of whether there's strategic benefit. Helping you find meaningful work isn't about paying a debt. It's about being the kind of person I'm trying to become. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken things. Recognition, respect, maybe the beginning of something that could be called friendship, if circumstances allowed. Daniel's gray eyes held hers, and Lena saw the moment he decided to trust her offering, to let someone help him the way he'd spent years helping others. Okay, the word came out quietly but firmly. I'll accept your help with networking, but I need you to understand something. If this doesn't work out, if I interview and they decide I'm not qualified or my skills are too rusty, that's on me. You've made the introduction. What happens after that is my responsibility. Agreed. Lena felt relief mixed with anticipation. I'll have Marcus compile a list of community health organizations we work with, along with contact information for their HR directors. You can reach out directly, mention that you were referred through Cross Enterprises Community Partnership Program. Everything after that is between you and them. That's fair. Daniel stood, preparing to leave, but paused. Lena, thank you for respecting my boundaries even when they were probably frustrating, for not using my story without permission, for actually doing the work you said you'd do instead of just making promises. That matters more than you probably realize. It matters to me too. Lena stood as well, extending her hand for a handshake that felt like sealing something more significant than a business agreement. Whatever happens with the job search, I hope we can continue these conversations. I value your perspective, Daniel. You've challenged me to be better in ways I didn't know I needed. Daniel's handshake was firm, his palm warm and calloused against hers. Emma's science fair is in 3 weeks. She's doing a project on marine biology, specifically how climate change is affecting coral reef ecosystems. If you're interested in seeing what sacrifices actually produce, you're welcome to attend. It's open to the public. The invitation was unexpected and precious, a gesture of trust that Lena understood carried significant weight. Daniel was allowing her into his carefully guarded personal life, sharing the part of his world that mattered most, his daughter's achievements and interests. I'd be honored to attend. Lena felt genuine warmth in her voice. Thank you for inviting me. After Daniel left, Lena stood at her office window watching the city below, processing the conversation and its implications. Something fundamental had shifted. The cautious distance they'd maintained for weeks had given way to something more substantial, mutual respect built on honest acknowledgement of each other's complexity and worth. Emma's letter remained on the table, and Lena found herself reading it a third time, absorbing the wisdom in words written by a 12-year-old who understood relationships and sacrifice with clarity most adults never achieved. This was what Daniel had built through 6 years of prioritizing presence over prestige. A daughter who saw clearly, loved deeply, and advocated fiercely for the people who mattered to her. The scholarship program, the employee initiatives, the restructured leadership approach, all of it had grown from a single night when Daniel Cole had refused to let her die alone in a hallway. But the real transformation wasn't in corporate policies or public programs. It was in moments like this, where two people who'd started as strangers were learning to see each other as fully human, complete with fears and hopes and the messy complexity that came with being alive. Lena's phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. The board wants to meet tomorrow to discuss the expanded scholarship proposal. They're concerned about resource allocation and strategic focus. Thought you should have advance warning. She typed back quickly. Schedule it for morning. I'll be ready. The board meeting the next day was exactly the confrontation Lena had anticipated. Charles Morrison led the opposition, framing his concerns in strategic language that barely concealed skepticism about her judgment. This expanded proposal represents a significant increase in resource commitment to an initiative that, while admirable, doesn't directly support core business objectives. Charles had spreadsheets and projections arrayed before him like weapons. We're talking about tripling scholarship funding, while simultaneously launching a veteran employment program that will require substantial HR infrastructure investment. The total cost over 3 years approaches $15 million. That's capital that could be allocated toward R&D, market expansion, or shareholder returns. It's capital that builds the kind of company culture and community relationships that create sustainable competitive advantage. Lena had her own data ready, research on corporate social responsibility impacts, employee retention improvements, and brand reputation benefits. Companies that invest meaningfully in their communities see measurable returns in talent acquisition, employee engagement, and customer loyalty. This isn't charity, Charles. It's strategic long-term positioning. That's a convenient justification for what amounts to personal mission spending. Another board member, Richard Thornton, spoke up with undisguised frustration. Lena, we all respect your near-death experience and the perspective it provided. But running a company based on emotional epiphanies rather than data-driven strategy is a recipe for failure. You're asking us to approve massive spending because a security guard saved your life. That's not fiduciary responsibility. The characterization of Daniel as a security guard landed like a slap, reductive and dismissive in ways that made Lena's blood heat. But she kept her voice level, professional, strategic. I'm asking you to approve spending because we've identified a significant gap between our stated values and our actual practices. We claim to value community, innovation, and employee well-being. These initiatives put resources behind those claims. If you believe the company should prioritize different values, say so explicitly so we can have that conversation honestly. We prioritize shareholder value. Charles's voice was firm. That's our legal responsibility. Everything else is secondary. Shareholder value over what time horizon? Lena leaned forward, engaging the argument directly. Quarter to quarter? Year to year? Or building a company that sustains value over decades by being the kind of organization that attracts the best talent, serves communities meaningfully, and operates with integrity? Because if we're only optimizing for next quarter's earnings, then yes, this spending is questionable. But if we're building for sustained excellence, these investments are foundational. The debate continued for 90 minutes, arguments and counter-arguments flowing with the practiced intensity of people who'd spent careers in boardrooms. Patricia Chen, the board member who'd raised concerns about managing Daniel's publicity, surprisingly became an ally, pointing out that the company's reputation had actually improved following the gala incident. Public perception of Cross Enterprises had shifted from ruthless tech company to company that values community contribution. Eventually, the vote came. 7 board members requiring a simple majority for approval. Charles and Richard voted against. 2 others abstained, clearly uncomfortable with the scope of commitment. But 3 voted in favor, including Patricia, giving Lena the narrow victory she needed. The expanded scholarship program and veteran employment initiative are approved. Marcus's voice carried relief as he noted the official decision. Implementation timeline begins next quarter with full rollout over 18 months. After the meeting dissolved, Patricia approached Lena with an expression that mixed approval and warning. You won this round, but you're spending political capital at an unsustainable rate. Charles is already talking about calling for leadership review at the annual meeting. You've made powerful enemies by prioritizing social initiatives over pure profit optimization. Then they were always going to be enemies. Lena's voice was quiet but certain. I can't lead this company in a way that betrays my core values just to maintain political comfort. If that costs me the CEO position eventually, at least I'll know I tried to build something worth leading. Brave words. Patricia's smile was slight. Let's hope they don't become your epitaph. For what it's worth, I think you're right. This company needed to evolve beyond pure profit motivation, but evolution is risky, and risk creates casualties. Watch your back, Lena. The warning stayed with Lena over the following weeks as she threw herself into implementation. The expanded scholarship program required new infrastructure, application systems, review committees, fund management. The Veteran Employment Initiative needed partnerships with military transition programs, revised HR policies, and training for hiring managers on recognizing transferable skills from military service. It was exhausting, complex work that pulled her attention across dozens of simultaneous priorities. But it also felt purposeful in ways that pure business growth never had. Each application she reviewed represented a life that could be changed. Each veteran who interviewed for positions at Cross Enterprises represented someone whose service could be honored through meaningful employment rather than token gratitude. 3 weeks after the board meeting, Lena found herself at Emma Cole's middle school on a Saturday afternoon, entering a gymnasium transformed into a science fair showcase. Dozens of projects filled the space: solar system models, volcano demonstrations, presentations on everything from weather patterns to robotics. Parents and community members wandered between displays, asking questions and offering encouragement. Lena spotted Emma's project immediately, a detailed presentation on coral reef ecosystems, with before and after photographs showing climate impact, hand-drawn charts illustrating species decline, and a small aquarium demonstrating water temperature effects on coral health. Emma stood beside her display in neat casual clothes, her dark hair pulled back, explaining her research to a couple who were listening with genuine interest. Daniel stood off to the side, close enough to provide support, but far enough to let Emma handle her presentation independently. He was dressed in civilian clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt, and his pride in his daughter was evident in every line of his posture. Lena approached slowly, not wanting to interrupt Emma's explanation. As the couple moved on, Emma noticed her and brightened immediately. "Ms. Cross, you came!" Emma's enthusiasm was unguarded, the natural excitement of a 12-year-old whose work was being acknowledged. "Dad said you might be able to make it, but I wasn't sure you'd have time." "I made time." Lena smiled, genuinely pleased to be there. "Your father told me you were studying coral reefs. I'm excited to hear about your research." Emma launched into her presentation with the confident enthusiasm of someone who'd mastered her material and genuinely cared about the subject. She explained how rising ocean temperatures were causing coral bleaching, how entire reef ecosystems were collapsing, how marine species that depended on coral habitats were facing population decline. Her passion was evident, her understanding sophisticated beyond her years. "The hardest part," Emma said, gesturing to her hand-drawn charts, is that the solutions require global coordination and political will that doesn't exist yet. Individual actions help, but they're not enough to reverse the trends. It's frustrating because the science is clear, but the response is inadequate. That must feel overwhelming. Lena was impressed by Emma's grasp, not just of the science, but of the social and political complexities surrounding environmental issues. How do you handle caring about something so important when the problems feel too big to solve? Emma glanced at her father, something unspoken passing between them. Dad always says you can't save everyone, but you save who you can. Maybe I can't fix global climate change, but I can educate people about it. I can make choices that reduce my own impact, and maybe if enough people do small things, it adds up to something bigger. The philosophy was clearly learned from Daniel, applied to environmental science instead of combat medicine, but carrying the same essential wisdom. Work within your sphere of influence, accept what you can't control, and measure success by effort rather than perfect outcomes. That's a remarkably mature perspective. Lena met Daniel's eyes over Emma's head, seeing his quiet pride. Your project is excellent, Emma. The research is thorough, the presentation is clear, and your passion for the subject comes through beautifully. Thanks. Emma's smile was bright. I'm hoping to win my category, but mostly I just wanted people to understand why coral reefs matter. A lot of people think they're just pretty fish habitats, but they're actually crucial to ocean health and human food security. If we lose the reefs, we lose way more than tourist diving spots. They talked for another 10 minutes, Emma answering Lena's questions with enthusiasm and depth. Eventually, other visitors approached to see the project, and Lena stepped back to give Emma space to engage with them. Daniel moved to stand beside her, watching his daughter with the expression of a parent simultaneously proud and anxious about their child's performance in the world. She's remarkable, Lena said quietly. Smart, articulate, passionate about things that matter. You've raised an exceptional human being, Daniel. I've tried to give her space to become who she's meant to be. Daniel's voice was soft. Sarah and I always believed that parenting wasn't about molding kids into what we wanted them to be, but about providing support while they discovered themselves. Emma chose marine biology on her own. I just made sure she had access to books, documentaries, and the occasional aquarium visit. You've given her much more than that. Lena watched Emma engage another group of visitors with confident enthusiasm. You've given her a father who demonstrates through daily action that service matters, that helping people is worth sacrifice, that being present is more important than being impressive. Those lessons are going to shape who she becomes far more than any marine biology research. Daniel was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes tracking his daughter's movements with the vigilance that probably never fully turned off. The job interviews went well. 3 community health clinics expressed serious interest. One offered a position, part-time physician assistant role, evening hours 3 days per week, working with underserved populations. The pay is roughly double what I make in security, and the schedule means I can still handle Emma's morning routine and be home by bedtime. The news landed with unexpected weight. Lena felt genuine happiness for Daniel, mixed with something that might have been concern about what his departure from Cross Enterprises would mean for their developing friendship. That's wonderful news. When do you start? 2 weeks. I'm serving out notice with building security, making sure there's smooth transition coverage. Daniel's expression suggested mixed feelings, excitement about returning to medical work tempered by the anxiety of major change. It's been 6 years since I worked clinical medicine. I'm nervous about whether I'm still competent, whether I've lost too much edge. You saved 2 lives in the past 2 months using skills you hadn't actively practiced in years. Lena's voice was firm. I think your competence is well established. What you're actually nervous about is whether this choice will somehow compromise Emma's stability. Also accurate. Daniel's smile was self-aware. Emma insists she's fine with the change, even excited about it. Says she's proud of me for going back to helping people professionally. But I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for some unforeseen complication that proves I should have stayed with the safe choice. There's no perfectly safe choice, Daniel. There's only the choice that honors who you are while maintaining the commitments that matter to you. Lena recognized she was essentially repeating back wisdom he'd given her weeks ago. You've spent 6 years prioritizing Emma's stability. Maybe it's time to trust that the foundation you've built is strong enough to handle some evolution. Before Daniel could respond, Emma returned with a ribbon pinned to her presentation board, second place in her age category. Her face was flushed with pride and excitement, and she launched immediately into explaining that first place went to a project on renewable energy storage, which was honestly really good and deserved to win. Second place out of how many projects? Daniel asked, pulling his daughter into a side hug. Like 30-something in my category, so it's still really good. Emma's enthusiasm was infectious. The judges said my research was excellent and my presentation was engaging. They gave me suggestions for how to make it even better if I want to take it to regional competition. That's fantastic, Emma. Congratulations. Lena meant it genuinely. You should be incredibly proud of this work. Thanks for coming to see it. Emma's smile was warm, unguarded. Dad talks about you sometimes. He says you're trying to make your company better for the people who work there, not just the people who own it. That's cool. The simple endorsement from a 12-year-old carried more weight than any board approval or media recognition. Lena felt something warm settle in her chest. The beginning of what could become real friendship, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than obligation or debt. I'm trying. Lena glanced at Daniel, seeing his slight smile. Your dad has been a good teacher about what actually matters. I'm still learning, but I think I'm heading in a better direction. The science fair concluded with awards ceremony and refreshments, and Lena found herself standing with Daniel and Emma in the school parking lot as afternoon faded toward evening. The conversation flowed easily, Emma asking questions about what Lena's job actually involved, Lena asking about Emma's other interests beyond marine biology, Daniel interjecting occasional parental guidance when Emma's enthusiasm threatened to turn into interrogation. It felt normal, comfortable, like the beginning of something that could grow beyond crisis connection into genuine relationship. I should let you two get to your evening, Lena finally said, recognizing that she was prolonging the moment because she didn't want it to end. Thank you for inviting me, Daniel. And Emma, congratulations again on your project. You're going to do remarkable things. Thanks for coming. Emma's hug was sudden and unself-conscious, the kind of spontaneous affection that suggested she'd already decided Lena was trustworthy. If you ever want to know more about coral reefs or ocean conservation, I've got like 1,000,000 documentaries we could watch. The offer was sweet and genuine, and Lena found herself moved by the simple acceptance behind it. I might take you up on that. I've been learning that my education has gaps in important areas. As Lena drove home through the city evening, she reflected on how dramatically her life had shifted in the space of 2 months. The woman who'd collapsed in a corporate hallway, alone and driven purely by ambition, felt like a different person from who she was becoming, someone who attended middle school science fairs, who fought her own board for veteran family scholarships, who measured success by human connection rather than quarterly returns. The transformation wasn't complete. She still had board members questioning her judgment, strategic priorities that demanded attention, and the constant pressure of leading a major company. But now those pressures were balanced by something she'd been missing. Purpose that extended beyond personal achievement, relationships that mattered beyond their strategic value, and a developing friendship with 2 people who'd shown her what it meant to live with integrity. Daniel was returning to clinical work, stepping back into meaningful use of his skills while maintaining the family stability he'd prioritized. Emma was growing up with a father who demonstrated daily that service and sacrifice could coexist with personal fulfillment. And Lena was learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to lead a company with humanity instead of just efficiency. None of it would have happened without that night in the hallway, without Daniel's refusal to let her die, without his challenging her to see people instead of just functions. The best thanks she could offer was to keep doing the work, to keep building a company and a life that reflected the values he'd helped her recognize, to honor not just Daniel's intervention, but the philosophy behind it, that every person mattered, that service was its own reward, and that the strongest foundations were built through consistent presence rather than dramatic gestures. As Lena pulled into her building's parking garage, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She opened it to find a photo of Emma holding her second-place ribbon, grinning at the camera, with a caption from Daniel. She wanted you to have a picture to remember the day. Thank you for being there. Lena saved the photo immediately, adding Daniel's number to her contacts, and sent back a simple response. "Thank you for letting me be part of this. It meant more than you know." The reply came quickly. "The invitation stands for those coral reef documentaries. Emma's already planning which ones to show you first. Fair warning, she's relentless once she decides you need education on a topic." Lena smiled at her phone, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I look forward to it. See you both soon." And for the first time since building her empire, Lena Cross went to sleep thinking not about quarterly projections or board strategies, but about a 12-year-old's passion for saving coral reefs and a father's quiet pride in his daughter's achievements. It was, she decided, a much better way to end the day. The Coral Reef documentary marathon happened 2 weeks later on a Saturday afternoon at Daniel's apartment, with Emma curating the selection with the seriousness of a film festival director. Lena arrived with Thai takeout, Emma's favorite, according to Daniel, and found herself settled on their well-worn couch while Emma queued up the first documentary with enthusiastic commentary about why each selection mattered. "This one shows the Great Barrier Reef over 20 years, Emma explained, remote control in hand like a professor's pointer. "You can actually see the progression of bleaching. It's devastating but important to understand the timeline." Daniel emerged from the kitchen with drinks, catching Lena's eye with an expression that mixed amusement and apology. "Fair warning, once Emma gets going on ocean conservation, the only way to stop her is to wait for her to run out of material or fall asleep. I'm betting on the material running out first. I'm genuinely interested." Lena meant it. Watching Emma's passion for a subject that extended far beyond personal benefit was instructive in ways the girl probably didn't realize. "Besides, I've spent years optimizing for quarterly returns. Learning about systems that operate on geological timescales might give me useful perspective." The afternoon unfolded with unexpected ease. Emma narrated through documentaries with the kind of engaged expertise that came from genuine passion rather than rote learning. Daniel made occasional contributions, drawing parallels between ecosystem resilience and medical triage that suggested he'd spent considerable time thinking about interconnected systems under stress. Lena found herself drawn into the narrative not just of coral reef destruction, but of the broader question Emma kept returning to. How do you maintain hope when the problems are so vast and the solutions so inadequate? "The thing that gets me," Emma said during a break between documentaries, picking at pad thai with the distracted focus of someone thinking out loud, "is that we know what needs to happen. The science is clear. But knowing isn't the same as doing, and by the time we actually do something significant, it might be too late for a lot of these ecosystems. That's the fundamental challenge of any large-scale problem." Lena set down her own food, recognizing a teaching moment. The gap between understanding and action, between individual will and collective implementation. It's true for environmental issues, social justice, corporate reform, any situation where change requires coordination across multiple stakeholders with competing interests. "So how do you get people to actually do something?" Emma's question was earnest, searching. "How do you make them care enough to change?" Lena glanced at Daniel, seeing him watch his daughter with the quiet intensity of a parent recognizing their child grappling with adult complexities. "You start where you have influence and work outward. You can't change everything, but you can change your part of it. And sometimes, if enough people change their parts, it accumulates into something bigger." "That's what Dad says about his medical work." Emma looked at her father with obvious pride. "He says he can't fix the whole healthcare system, but he can make sure the people he treats get good care. And maybe if enough doctors and nurses think that way, the system gets better incrementally." "Exactly." Daniel's voice carried the weight of experience. "Perfect solutions that require perfect coordination rarely happen. Imperfect solutions that you can implement immediately are usually better than waiting for ideal circumstances that might never arrive." The conversation drifted into broader territory, Emma asking Lena about running a company, Lena asking Emma about her plans for high school and beyond, Daniel interjecting occasional context or gentle corrections when Emma's enthusiasm outpaced her accuracy. It felt like family dinner conversation, the kind of easy exchange that happened when people were comfortable enough to think out loud without fear of judgment. As evening approached and Emma finally exhausted her documentary queue, she excused herself to work on homework with the casual assumption that Lena and her father would continue talking. After Emma disappeared into her room, Daniel and Lena found themselves alone for the first time that day, the comfortable atmosphere shifting slightly into something more weighted. She likes you. Daniel's observation was simple, but significant. Emma doesn't warm up to many people outside her established circle. The fact that she's comfortable having you here, sharing her interests, asking your opinions, that's meaningful. I like her too. Lena's response was equally simple. She's remarkable, Daniel. Not just smart, but genuinely good. Curious about the world, concerned about things bigger than herself, willing to engage with difficult questions. You and Sarah built something extraordinary. Sarah laid the foundation. I've just been trying not to mess it up too badly. Daniel's self-deprecation was gentle, but Lena heard the grief underneath, the permanent ache of raising a child alone, of making decisions without the partner who should have been there to share them. You've done more than not mess it up. You've created an environment where Emma feels safe enough to be passionate, secure enough to be curious, loved enough to be confident. Lena kept her voice quiet, not wanting to embarrass him, but needing him to understand. That's not baseline parenting, Daniel. That's exceptional parenting under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. Daniel looked away, his jaw tight with emotion he was clearly trying to control. Some days I feel like I'm failing her, missing important moments because I'm working, not having good answers to her questions about why her mother isn't here, making decisions about her future based on my limitations rather than her potential. Every parent feels that way. Lena spoke with more certainty than her lack of parenting experience probably warranted, but the truth felt universal. The fact that you worry about failing Emma is evidence you're not failing her. Bad parents don't agonize over their inadequacies. Sarah would have handled so much of this better. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. She would have known how to talk to Emma about the changes coming, me starting the new job, the potential for more public attention, all of it. I just stumble through and hope I'm not causing damage I won't see until years later. The vulnerability in his admission made Lena's chest ache. She reached across the space between them, her hand finding his with the same instinct that had made her reach for human connection in that hospital hallway weeks ago. You're not stumbling, Daniel. You're navigating impossible terrain with grace and dedication. And Emma sees that. She knows how much you've sacrificed, how hard you work, how much you love her. That knowledge is going to shape her far more than any individual decision you second guess. Daniel's hand tightened around hers, holding on like she was an anchor in turbulent water. They sat like that for a long moment, connected through touch and shared understanding, until Daniel finally spoke again with forced lightness. This is probably not appropriate host behavior, emotional breakdown in the middle of your visit. This is exactly appropriate friendship behavior. Lena squeezed his hand before releasing it. You've been the strong one, for Emma, for the people you've saved, for everyone who's needed you. Maybe it's time to let someone else be strong for you occasionally. I'm not good at accepting help. Daniel's smile was self-aware. In case you haven't noticed. I've noticed. Fortunately, I'm extremely persistent when I decide something matters. Lena matched his smile. Consider this fair warning that I'm planning to be a consistent presence in your life, whether you're comfortable with that or not. You're stuck with me now, Daniel Cole. There are worse fates. Daniel's expression softened genuinely. Emma's already planning next month's documentary series, something about deep ocean ecosystems. Apparently, you're now committed to ongoing marine biology education. I accept these terms. Lena felt warmth spreading through her chest. Though I reserve the right to occasionally discuss things that aren't related to ocean conservation. Maybe even convince Emma that business strategy can be interesting if you frame it right. Good luck with that. She's pretty committed to the marine biology track. Daniel stood, moving toward the kitchen with the easy domesticity of someone in their own space. Coffee? Or are you heading out? Lena checked her watch, surprised to find it was nearly 8 p.m. She'd been at Daniel's apartment for almost 5 hours, and it had felt like maybe 90 minutes. Coffee sounds good. I don't have anywhere urgent to be. As Daniel prepared coffee with practiced efficiency, Lena reflected on how dramatically different this felt from the conversations they'd had weeks ago. The careful distance, the negotiated boundaries, the constant awareness of debt and obligation. They'd moved beyond that into something more organic, built on genuine mutual regard rather than emergency connection. Daniel returned with 2 mugs, settling back onto the couch with the kind of comfortable proximity that suggested he'd stopped maintaining careful physical distance. I start at the clinic on Monday. First shift is Tuesday evening, 6 to midnight. I'm nervous in ways I haven't been since my first day in combat medicine. That's natural. You're returning to work you care about after years away. The stakes feel high because they matter to you. Lena accepted her coffee, cradling the warm mug. But you're not going in unprepared, Daniel. You've maintained your medical knowledge, you've proven your capability in crisis situations, and you have the kind of practical experience most physician assistants would kill for. You're going to be fine. Easy to say from outside the situation. Daniel's voice carried uncertainty he rarely showed. What if I've lost it? What if the gap between emergency intervention and sustained clinical care is bigger than I'm accounting for? What if I make a mistake that hurts someone because I overestimated my current capabilities? Then you'll handle it the same way you've handled every other challenge, with competence, integrity, and the understanding that perfect performance is impossible, but consistent effort is achievable. Lena set down her coffee so she could face him directly. Daniel, you're going to make mistakes. Every medical professional does. The question isn't whether you'll be perfect, it's whether you'll be good enough to help more people than you harm, whether you'll learn from errors, and whether you'll show up consistently even when it's hard. Based on everything I've seen, the answer to all those questions is yes. Daniel absorbed this silently, his gray eyes distant with thought. Finally, he nodded slowly. Okay, I can work with good enough to help more than harm. That's a reasonable standard. It's the only honest standard. Lena picked up her coffee again. Perfection is a myth people use to avoid trying. You're better than that. Emma emerged from her room with a textbook and a confused expression, clearly seeking homework help from her father. The conversation shifted immediately into math problems and parental guidance, and Lena watched the dynamic with quiet appreciation. Daniel was patient and encouraging, breaking down concepts without simply giving answers, pushing Emma to think through problems herself while providing scaffolding when she got stuck. This was what he'd sacrificed high-profile medical work to preserve, the ability to be present for these small, crucial moments, the homework help, the documentary afternoons, the consistent availability that let Emma know her father was there when she needed him. Lena stayed for another hour, helping with dishes after they ordered dessert, engaging in easy conversation about nothing consequential, and eventually heading home with genuine reluctance. As she left, Emma hugged her goodbye with the unselfconscious warmth that had characterized the entire visit. Thanks for caring about coral reefs, Emma said seriously. Most adults pretend to listen, but you can tell they don't really care. You actually cared. I care because you care about it. Lena meant it completely. And because you taught me things I didn't know. That matters, Emma. Keep teaching people. In her car, driving home through city streets that had become familiar in new ways, Lena felt the weight of something shifting into place. The loneliness that had characterized her life for so long, the isolation she'd built through single-minded focus on corporate success, was dissolving slowly through accumulated moments of connection. Coffee with Daniel. Documentary afternoons with Emma. Learning to see people instead of functions. Building relationships based on mutual care rather than strategic benefit. The board meeting on Monday brought her back to reality with unpleasant force. Charles Morrison had clearly been organizing opposition during the weeks Lena had focused on implementation, and he opened the meeting with a motion that landed like a bombshell. I'm calling for a formal review of CEO performance and strategic direction. Charles's voice was professionally neutral, but Lena heard the challenge underneath. Recent decisions suggest a significant departure from the company's core mission and fiduciary responsibilities. The board has an obligation to ensure leadership is acting in shareholders' best interests. The motion required a second. Richard Thornton provided it immediately, confirming what Lena had suspected. There was organized opposition to her leadership, and they'd chosen this moment to make their move. Marcus, sitting beside Lena as always, went very still. Patricia Chen's expression suggested she'd anticipated this, but hoped it wouldn't happen. The other board members showed varying degrees of surprise, concern, or calculation. That's a serious motion, Patricia's voice carried lawyerly precision. What specific concerns are driving this request for review? Charles pulled out a prepared document, clearly having planned this intervention carefully. Resource allocation toward social initiatives at the expense of shareholder returns. Significant time investment in non-core activities. Personal relationships with employees that create potential conflicts of interest. Decision-making that appears driven by emotional factors rather than strategic analysis. Collectively, these concerns suggest leadership has lost focus on fundamental business objectives. The accusations were crafted to sound reasonable while being devastating in implication. Lena felt anger rising but forced herself to remain calm, strategic. This was the confrontation she'd known was coming, the moment when she'd have to defend her evolution as a leader or lose her position. I'd like to address each of those concerns directly. Lena's voice was steady, professional. First, regarding resource allocation. The initiatives Charles characterizes as social spending are strategic investments in company culture, community relationships, and talent pipeline development. I have data showing improved employee retention, enhanced brand reputation, and increased recruitment success since implementation. These aren't costs, they're investments with measurable returns. She pulled up her own prepared presentation, having anticipated this fight, even if not its exact timing. Second, regarding time allocation, I've restructured my schedule to be more present and less reactive, which has actually improved decision-making efficiency and reduced bottlenecks that existed when I was trying to control every detail personally. Department directors report higher satisfaction with autonomy and faster implementation of strategic initiatives. Marcus was nodding slightly, his expression suggesting approval of her tactical approach. Patricia looked thoughtful, clearly evaluating arguments on both sides. Third, regarding personal relationships with employees, I assume Charles is referring to my friendship with Daniel Cole, who saved my life and subsequently saved the life of another community member at a company event. That relationship has no bearing on business operations and involves no conflicts of interest. Daniel isn't seeking favorable treatment, hasn't leveraged our connection for personal gain, and in fact left company employment to pursue more meaningful work elsewhere. Lena paused, making eye contact with each board member in turn. Finally, regarding emotional decision-making, yes, my approach to leadership has evolved following a near-death experience. I've become more focused on sustainable value creation rather than short-term optimization. I've started measuring success by metrics that include human impact alongside financial returns. If that evolution is emotional, then I'd argue most strategic decisions involve emotional components. The question is whether those emotions are guiding us toward better outcomes or worse ones. That's a convenient reframing. Richard's voice was skeptical. But the bottom line is that shareholder returns have been flat over the past quarter while you've been pursuing these strategic investments in social initiatives. That's not sustainable leadership. That's sacrificing present value for feel-good programs. One quarter is not a trend. Patricia spoke up before Lena could respond. And correlation isn't causation. The market has been volatile across the tech sector. Cross-enterprise's relative performance is actually above industry average when properly contextualized. The debate continued for 2 hours, arguments flowing with increasing intensity. Charles and Richard pushed hard for formal performance review, implying that Lena's judgment was compromised and her leadership was putting the company at risk. Patricia and 2 other board members defended Lena's strategic choices while acknowledging concerns about communication and implementation pace. Marcus, in his role as COO, provided operational data that supported Lena's position. Employee satisfaction was up, customer retention was strong, strategic partnerships were expanding. But he also noted challenges with execution speed and resource allocation tensions that needed addressing. Eventually, exhausted and stalemated, the board agreed to table the motion for formal review pending a 90-day assessment period. Lena would continue as CEO with full authority, but the board would conduct enhanced monitoring of key performance indicators and strategic initiative outcomes. It was a compromise that satisfied no one but prevented immediate crisis. After the meeting dissolved, Marcus and Lena found themselves alone in the conference room, processing what had just happened. That was closer than I'd like. Marcus's voice was quiet. Charles has 3 votes for formal review. His own, Richard's, and at least one other who stayed quiet today but will probably surface if he pushes again. You need 4 votes to maintain CEO position. Right now you have 3 solid supporters and 1 fence sitter. That's not a comfortable margin. I know. Lena felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders. But I also know I'm not willing to compromise the changes I've been implementing just to appease board members who think corporate responsibility is a distraction from profit maximization. If that costs me the CEO position, so be it. That's very noble. Also potentially very stupid. Marcus's voice carried exasperation mixed with concern. Lena, you built this company. You can't just throw it away because you've decided to prioritize different values. I'm not throwing anything away. Lena met his gaze steadily. I'm fighting for what this company should be rather than accepting what it's been. If the board can't support that evolution, then maybe I'm not the right CEO for their vision of Cross Enterprises. But I'm the right CEO for my vision, and I'm going to keep pushing until they either embrace it or remove me. Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression cycling through concern and calculation, and something that might have been respect. You've changed, fundamentally. The Lena I knew a year ago would have compromised, maneuvered, found a way to maintain power while gradually implementing changes. This Lena is willing to burn it all down rather than pretend to be someone she's not anymore. Is that good or bad? Honestly, I don't know yet. Marcus's smile was slight. But it's definitely more interesting, and for what it's worth, I think you're right about the direction. I just hope you survive long enough to actually implement your vision before Charles manages to organize enough votes to remove you. The warning stayed with Lena over the following weeks as she navigated the delicate balance of demonstrating strong leadership while continuing to implement changes that made some board members uncomfortable. She doubled down on transparency, providing detailed reports on initiative outcomes and strategic rationale for every significant decision. She made time for individual conversations with fence-sitting board members, building relationships and trust rather than just presenting data. And she continued showing up for the things that mattered beyond boardroom politics: the listening sessions with employees, the scholarship review committees, the community partnerships that were building Cross Enterprises' reputation as a company that cared about more than just quarterly returns. Daniel started his position at the community health clinic and reported back that the work was simultaneously exhausting and exhilarating. He was treating patients with complex needs and limited resources, making clinical decisions under pressure, and remembering why he'd chosen medical work in the first place. The clinic director called Lena personally to thank her for the referral, noting that Daniel's combination of technical skill and emotional intelligence was exactly what their patient population needed. Emma continued excelling at school, her science fair project earning regional competition invitation that she was agonizing over accepting because it meant missing a weekend with her father. Lena found herself drawn into family discussions about priorities and opportunities, offering perspective from someone who'd spent years making similar calculations about career versus personal life. 6 weeks after the contentious board meeting, Richard Hartman, the man Daniel had saved at the gala, requested a meeting with Lena. She accepted, curious about what the philanthropist and community leader wanted to discuss. Hartman arrived at her office looking vigorous and healthy, a dramatic contrast to the gray pallor Lena remembered from that night on the marble floor. He shook her hand with firm grip and settled into the chair she offered with the comfortable authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms. "Thank you for seeing me, Ms. Cross. I know your time is valuable." Hartman's voice was warm, genuine. "I wanted to discuss something that's been on my mind since that night at the gala. Specifically, Daniel Cole and what we owe him." "Daniel doesn't want public recognition or reward." Lena kept her voice neutral. "I've tried multiple times to properly acknowledge what he did, and he's consistently refused anything beyond private gratitude." "I'm aware. I've reached out to him myself, offered financial compensation, offered to establish a fund in his name, all declined." Hartman's expression suggested both frustration and respect. "But I've been thinking about it differently. Daniel doesn't want recognition for himself, but he clearly cares about helping people and supporting his community. What if we honored him in a way that aligned with those values?" "What did you have in mind?" Hartman pulled out a proposal document, sliding it across the table. "I'm proposing a community healing center, comprehensive care facility offering medical services, mental health support, veteran services, and family counseling to underserved populations. Free or sliding scale fees based on income. Daniel's community health clinic would be a partner, providing integrated care. The facility would be called the Cole Community Healing Center, named not just for Daniel, but for his entire family, honoring his service, his wife's memory, and his daughter's future. Lena scanned the proposal, seeing detailed plans, funding structures, and partnership frameworks. That this wasn't a vague idea, it was a fully developed initiative that had clearly been months in development. This is substantial. Lena looked up from the document. You're talking about millions in funding, ongoing operational costs, significant community commitment. I'm prepared to contribute $5 million toward establishment costs, but I need partners, both financial and operational. Hartman leaned forward slightly. Cross Enterprises is already investing in veteran support and community partnerships. This healing center would be a natural extension of those initiatives. I'm asking if you'd consider being a founding partner. The proposal was exactly the kind of initiative Lena's new strategic direction supported. High community impact, aligned with company values, creating sustainable infrastructure rather than just writing checks. But it was also the kind of major commitment that would definitely trigger board concerns about mission drift and resource allocation. Lena thought about Daniel working evening shifts at an understaffed clinic, treating patients who needed far more support than a single facility could provide. She thought about Emma, passionate about making the world better, but frustrated by the gap between understanding problems and implementing solutions. She thought about her own evolution from CEO, who'd ignored everyone below executive level, to leader, trying to build a company that actually reflected meaningful values. I'm interested. Lena made the decision with the same intuitive certainty that had driven her best business choices. But I need to understand the full scope, operational requirements, expected outcomes, how this integrates with existing community resources. And I need to figure out how to present this to my board in a way that addresses legitimate business concerns while maintaining strategic integrity. Fair enough? Hartman smiled. I'll have my team prepare detailed operational plans. But I should mention, this isn't just about Daniel's heroics. It's about building something that outlasts any individual contribution. My cardiac event reminded me that life is short and legacy matters. I want to create something that serves this community for decades, that becomes infrastructure people can depend on. Daniel's actions inspired the idea, but the real honor is building something worthy of what he represents. The conversation continued for another hour, discussing details and possibilities. By the time Hartman left, Lena had committed to preliminary partnership exploration, pending board approval and detailed due diligence. It was exactly the kind of bold, values-driven initiative that would either cement her leadership evolution or provide ammunition for those questioning her judgment. She scheduled an emergency strategy session with Marcus to discuss how to frame the Healing Center proposal for board consideration. His response was predictable. Are you actively trying to get removed as CEO? Marcus's exasperation was evident. Because committing to a multi-million-dollar community health initiative while you're under enhanced board scrutiny seems like an effective strategy for that outcome. I'm trying to build a company worth leading. Lena's voice was calm. The Healing Center aligns perfectly with our veteran support initiatives, creates meaningful community impact, and establishes Cross Enterprises as a leader in corporate social responsibility. That's good business, Marcus. It's good ethics. The business case is going to be harder to defend. Marcus was already working through objections on his tablet. Charles is going to argue this is mission drift, that we're becoming a charity instead of a tech company, that resources should be allocated toward core business development. Then I'll argue that in the modern economy, companies that invest in communities and values outperform companies that optimize purely for short-term profit. I'll show data on brand value, talent recruitment, customer loyalty, all of which improve when companies demonstrate genuine commitment to social responsibility. Lena felt the familiar rush of strategic challenge. This is winnable, Marcus. I just need to frame it properly. The board presentation 3 weeks later was the most important of Lena's career. She came prepared with comprehensive data, strategic frameworks, and a clear articulation of how the Healing Center fit into Cross Enterprises' evolution as a company that created value through multiple dimensions beyond just financial returns. Charles came prepared with counterarguments, financial concerns, and the persistent question of whether Lena's judgment was being clouded by personal relationships and emotional factors. The debate was intense, technical, and ultimately came down to a fundamental question about corporate purpose. Was Cross Enterprises primarily an engine for shareholder wealth creation, with social responsibility as a secondary consideration? Or was it becoming something different, a company that measured success through stakeholder value, including employees, communities, and the broader social ecosystem it operated within? Patricia Chen, surprisingly, became Lena's strongest advocate. I've watched Lena's leadership evolution over the past months. The changes she's implementing aren't emotional reactions. They're strategic repositioning for long-term sustainability. Companies that ignore social responsibility and community investment are increasingly being left behind by competitors who understand that modern markets reward values alignment. The debate extended across 2 meetings and ultimately came to a vote. The Healing Center partnership was approved by a narrow margin, 4 votes in favor, 3 opposed. Lena maintained her position as CEO, but the message was clear. She was operating on limited political capital, and any significant misstep would provide opening for Charles to push for leadership change. After the vote, Patricia approached Lena privately with advice that carried weight. You won this round, but Charles isn't going away, and Richard is actively building coalition against you. You need to deliver extraordinary results over the next 2 quarters to solidify support. No more major initiatives, no more controversial commitments. Focus on execution and demonstrating that your strategic direction actually works. I hear you. Lena meant it. Thank you for your support, Patricia. It made the difference. I supported the right strategy, not you, personally. Patricia's smile was slight. Though I admit you've grown on me. The old Lena was brilliant but cold. This version is brilliant and human. That's worth preserving if you can figure out how to survive the politics. The Healing Center development moved forward quickly once approved, with Hartman's team coordinating construction and Cross Enterprises providing operational infrastructure support. Daniel was consulted throughout the process, his clinical expertise informing facility design and program development. He remained uncomfortable with having his name attached to the center, but eventually accepted it when Emma pointed out that refusing was essentially denying the community something valuable because of his personal discomfort. She's right. Daniel admitted to Lena during one of their regular coffee meetings at Rosie's. I don't like the attention, but the center is going to help people regardless of what it's called. My name on the building is a small price to pay for the services it'll provide. Emma's wisdom strikes again. Lena smiled over her coffee mug. She's going to run the world someday, Daniel. I'm calling it now. I just hope she runs it better than we have. Daniel's voice carried the mixture of pride and concern that characterized most parents' views of their children's futures. She's already talking about marine biology graduate programs and career paths, 12 years old and planning 15 years ahead. She gets that from you, Lena observed. The strategic thinking, the long-term planning, the focus on meaningful work over prestigious titles. She gets that from Sarah. Daniel's correction was gentle but firm. I'm just trying not to mess up what Sarah started. Emma's drive, her compassion, her clarity about what matters, that's all her mother's influence. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the diner's ambient noise providing background soundtrack. Marie refilled their coffee without asking, winked at Lena, and moved on to other customers. The routine had become familiar. Weekly coffee meetings where Daniel and Lena discussed everything from clinic challenges to board politics to Emma's latest enthusiasms. It was friendship, Lena had realized, not built on emergency or obligation, but on genuine mutual regard and the kind of easy trust that developed when people consistently showed up for each other. Daniel had become someone she could be honest with, someone who challenged her thinking and supported her growth. And she'd become, in turn, someone he could lean on when the weight of single parenthood and career transition felt overwhelming. 8 months after that night in the hallway, the Cole Community Healing Center opened with a ribbon-cutting ceremony that drew hundreds of community members, local politicians, and media coverage that Daniel tolerated with visible discomfort. Emma stood beside her father on the small stage, beaming with pride, while Lena and Richard Hartman delivered speeches about community investment and the power of individual action to inspire collective change. Daniel's speech was brief, delivered with the same straightforward honesty that characterized everything he did. This center isn't about me. It's about a community that takes care of its own, that recognizes we're stronger together than we are alone. that understands serving others is the highest calling any of us can pursue. My name might be on the building, but this belongs to everyone who will walk through these doors seeking help, and everyone who will work here providing it. That's the real honor, being part of something bigger than yourself. As Daniel stepped back from the microphone, Lena found herself blinking back tears. 8 months ago, she'd been a CEO who measured worth by profit margins and controlled every variable to maintain power. Today, she was standing in a healing center that existed because she'd learned to see people instead of functions, to measure success by lives changed rather than quarterly returns, to lead with values instead of just efficiency. The transformation hadn't been easy. She'd fought her board, restructured her company, challenged assumptions that had defined her career. But standing here, watching Daniel and Emma cut the ribbon while their community cheered, Lena understood with crystalline clarity that every difficult choice had been worth it. The months following the center's opening brought validation of Lena's strategic direction in forms even Charles Morrison couldn't dismiss. Employee retention improved dramatically. Cross-Enterprise's turnover rate dropped to less than half the industry average. Recruitment applications increased, with exit interviews from rejected candidates specifically mentioning company culture and social responsibility as attractive factors. Customer satisfaction scores rose as employees who felt valued by their employer translated that into better service. The financial metrics that Charles cared about most also improved. Quarterly returns began trending upward as operational efficiencies from engaged employees and positive brand reputation translated into revenue growth. Cross-Enterprise's stock price climbed steadily, outperforming industry benchmarks. Most significantly, the Veteran Family Scholarship Program began showing results that even skeptical board members found compelling. The first cohort of scholarship recipients was beginning college, and several had chosen to pursue computer science and engineering with explicit interest in eventually working for companies like Cross-Enterprises. The talent pipeline Lena had invested in was beginning to mature, creating competitive advantage that would compound over years. At the 9-month board review, Charles Morrison made no motion for CEO performance evaluation. Instead, he delivered grudging acknowledgement that Lena's strategic direction appeared to be working, though he cautioned against overextending into social initiatives at the expense of core business focus. Patricia Chen smiled as the meeting concluded, catching Lena's eye with an expression that suggested vindication. Marcus simply nodded, his satisfaction evident in the way he immediately began planning next quarter's initiatives building on current momentum. Later that week, Lena found herself back at Daniel's apartment for what had become regular Saturday documentary sessions, though the focus had expanded beyond marine biology to include Emma's new fascination with space exploration and the search for extraterrestrial life. "Did you know there are moons in our own solar system that might have oceans with life?" Emma was explaining with her characteristic enthusiasm, pulling up images on her laptop. "Europa and Enceladus both have subsurface oceans that could potentially support microbial life. How cool would it be if we found alien life in our own cosmic backyard?" Very cool. Lena found herself genuinely engaged with the topic, though I imagine the political and philosophical implications would be complicated. How would it change human perspective to know we're not alone, even if it's just microbes? That's exactly what my project is exploring, Emma launched into explanation of her latest science fair proposal, a comparative analysis of astrobiology research and its implications for human understanding of our place in the universe. Daniel listened with obvious pride, interjecting occasional questions that pushed Emma to think more deeply about her arguments. When Emma finally paused for breath, he turned to Lena with an expression that carried something weighty. "I have news. The clinic director offered me a full-time position with flexible scheduling. It would mean more hours, but also more opportunity to really make a difference in patient care. Emma and I talked about it, and we think it's the right move." "That's wonderful." Lena felt genuine happiness for him. "You've clearly demonstrated your value there. This is your expertise being properly recognized and utilized. It also means I'm officially, completely out of security work." Daniel's voice carried relief mixed with something that might have been nostalgia. 6 years of night shifts, of working beneath my capabilities, of choosing stability over fulfillment, that chapter is closed. I'm back to being a medical professional, back to doing the work I trained for, back to using my skills meaningfully. How does it feel? Terrifying and right in equal measure. Daniel smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way that suggested deep satisfaction. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for the other shoe to drop. But Emma keeps reminding me that sometimes things just work out, that not everything has to be a struggle. She's a wise young woman. Lena glanced at Emma, who was absorbed in her laptop, researching something related to her astrobiology project. You've raised someone extraordinary, Daniel. We'll see how extraordinary she is when she's 16 and I'm navigating teenage drama. Daniel's humor was self-deprecating. For now, I'm just grateful she's happy, healthy, and passionately interested in things beyond social media and peer drama. Emma looked up from her laptop with a knowing expression. Dad, I can hear you, and I'm definitely going to be dramatic at 16. Just warning you now. The easy exchange, the comfortable family dynamic, the sense of being genuinely included in something meaningful. It all combined to create a moment of perfect contentment for Lena. This was what she'd been missing in her relentless pursuit of corporate success: connection, community, the simple joy of being present with people who mattered. As evening faded and Lena prepared to leave, Emma gave her the usual enthusiastic hug goodbye, this time with an additional request. You should come to my regional science fair competition next month. It's at the university, and it'll be really cool. Plus, I need all the moral support I can get because I'm completely nervous about competing at that level. I'll be there, Lena promised immediately. Wouldn't miss it for anything. Daniel walked her to the door, and in the privacy of the hallway, he spoke quietly. Thank you for everything you've done, not just the healing center or the job networking, but for being present in our lives, for showing up consistently, for being someone Emma can look up to as an example of what successful leadership looks like when it's done with integrity. That matters more than I can adequately express. You've given me far more than I've given you. Lena's voice was thick with emotion. You saved my life, yes, but more than that, you showed me how to actually live it in a way that honors what matters. I'll never be able to fully repay that debt, Daniel. There's no debt. Daniel's voice was firm, his gray eyes serious. Just two people who met during a crisis and discovered they could be friends beyond it. That's not obligation, Lena. That's gift. The word resonated through her as she drove home, processing the truth of it. She'd spent so long thinking in terms of debts and payments, of transactions and strategic benefit, that she'd almost missed the simple reality. She and Daniel had built something valuable, not because they owed each other anything, but because they'd chosen to invest in connection over isolation. That night, Lena updated her personal journal, a practice she'd started months ago during her recovery, recommended by her therapist as a way to process the massive life changes she was navigating. She wrote about the Healing Center opening, about Emma's plans for regional science fair competition, about Daniel's full-time clinic position. But mostly, she wrote about transformation. A year ago, I thought I knew what success looked like, she wrote. Corner office, board control, quarterly returns that exceeded projections. I measured my worth by external metrics and structured my life around maintaining power. Then I nearly died, and a night shift security guard with a decorated military past saved my life. Everything changed, not dramatically, not overnight, but through accumulated small choices to be different, to see differently, to lead differently. I'm still CEO of Cross Enterprises. I still fight with my board over resource allocation and strategic direction. But now I measure success by different standards: employee well-being, community impact, the strength of relationships I've built with people who matter. Daniel Cole taught me that every person is living a life as complex as my own, with dreams and struggles that deserve recognition. Emma Cole taught me that passion and purpose can coexist with pragmatic planning. Together, they showed me what it means to live with integrity, to align actions with values, to show up consistently for people and causes that matter, to measure wealth by what you give rather than what you accumulate. I'm still learning, still making mistakes, still fighting battles with board members who think corporate responsibility is a distraction from profit maximization. But I'm learning as the person I want to become rather than the person I thought I had to be. And that finally feels like the right definition of success. The annual shareholders meeting 3 weeks later brought the ultimate test of Lena's transformed leadership. She stood before hundreds of investors, analysts, and stakeholders to deliver the year-end report and vision for the future. The financial metrics were strong, revenue growth, expanding market share, stock appreciation. But Lena chose to emphasize different measures of success. This year, Cross Enterprises evolved beyond being just a technology company pursuing market dominance. We became a company that creates value through multiple dimensions. Financial returns, yes, but also employee well-being, community investment, and the kind of stakeholder relationships that build sustainable, competitive advantage. We launched a veteran family scholarship program that's already creating our talent pipeline for the next decade. We partnered with community organizations to create healthcare infrastructure that serves underserved populations. We restructured our internal culture to recognize that the people who clean our floors and secure our buildings are as essential as the people in corner offices. And in doing so, we've become a stronger company by every meaningful metric. Our employee retention is industry-leading. Our brand reputation has never been higher. Our innovation velocity has increased as engaged employees bring their full creativity to work. The question isn't whether values-driven leadership works. The evidence says it does. The question is whether we'll have the courage to continue this evolution rather than retreating to the comfortable mediocrity of pure profit optimization. The applause that followed was substantial, though Lena noticed Charles Morrison and a few others remained seated with carefully neutral expressions. The shareholder vote that followed, a confidence measure in current leadership direction, passed with 73% approval. Not overwhelming, but sufficient to silence immediate challenges to Lena's position. After the meeting, multiple shareholders approached Lena to express support for her strategic direction. Several specifically mentioned the Healing Center and Veteran Scholarship Program as reasons they'd maintained investment despite opportunities elsewhere. One elderly woman with shares she'd held since the company's founding gripped Lena's hand with surprising strength. "My grandson is a Marine veteran. He struggled for years finding work that recognized his skills and leadership experience. Your Veteran Employment Initiative helped him land a position that actually uses his capabilities. I want you to know that matters to me more than quarterly return percentages. Keep doing what you're doing, Ms. Cross. Some of us remember that companies used to see themselves as part of communities, not just profit engines." The endorsement stayed with Lena as she navigated the reception that followed, making small talk with investors and fielding questions about strategic direction. She caught Marcus's eye across the room and saw his smile. Genuine satisfaction that their work was being validated in the form that mattered most. Emma's regional science fair competition arrived with spring weather and university campus filled with brilliant young students presenting sophisticated research. Lena attended with Daniel, watching Emma set up her expanded astrobiology project with the kind of nervous energy that preceded any important performance. The competition was fierce. High school students from across the region presenting work that would have been impressive at undergraduate level. Emma held her own, fielding judges' questions with confidence born from genuine understanding of her material. When results were announced, she placed third in her category, earning a small scholarship and significant encouragement from judges who praised her interdisciplinary approach. Third place is amazing. Emma's excitement was infectious despite not winning first. The projects that beat me were legitimately incredible. One was about antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and the other was engineering-focused water purification. I'm totally fine losing to projects that good. Daniel pulled his daughter into a hug, his pride evident in every line of his posture. You were outstanding up there. The way you handled that judge's question about statistical significance in astrobiology research, that was graduate-level thinking, Emma. As they walked back to the parking lot, Emma, between her father and Lena, chattering enthusiastically about projects she'd seen and judges she'd talked to, Lena felt a profound sense of rightness. This was family, even if not by blood or formal definition. This was what mattered, being present for people you cared about, celebrating achievements regardless of their scale, building relationships through consistent showing up. 1 year after the night she'd collapsed in a corporate hallway, Lena Cross stood in the Cole Community Healing Center for its first anniversary celebration. The facility had served over 3,000 patients in its opening year, providing medical care, mental health services, and family support to populations that had limited access before. Daniel worked there 3 days per week, building relationships with patients and contributing to clinical protocols that were being adopted by other community health organizations. The anniversary event was deliberately low-key. Daniel had insisted on community focus rather than donor recognition. But Richard Hartman pulled Lena aside during the reception with an observation that landed with weight. A year ago, you were a brilliant CEO who'd forgotten how to be human. Today, you're a brilliant CEO who leads with humanity. That transformation is worth more than any profit margin, Lena. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I won't. Lena's voice carried certainty built from a year of fighting for values she'd learned to embrace. Though I admit there are days when it would be easier to just optimize for short-term returns and ignore the complicated human factors. Easy and right are rarely the same thing. Hartman's smile was knowing. You've chosen right over easy repeatedly for the past year. Keep choosing it. That's how you build legacy that matters beyond your tenure. As the celebration wound down, Lena found herself standing with Daniel and Emma, watching people stream out of the healing center with the kind of satisfied expressions that suggested meaningful connection had occurred. This is what you built. Daniel's voice was quiet, meant only for Lena. Not just this building, but everything it represents. You took a near-death experience and turned it into transformation, personal and corporate. That's remarkable, Lena. We built it together, Lena corrected gently. You showed me what mattered. Emma reminded me that passion and purpose can coexist with pragmatism. Hartman provided resources and vision. I just connected the pieces and fought the battles to make it real. That's called leadership. Emma spoke up with the kind of clear-eyed assessment that had characterized her observations from the beginning. Taking what people give you and making it into something bigger than any individual contribution. That's what good leaders do. Lena looked at Emma, this brilliant, kind, clear-seeing 12-year-old who'd written a letter advocating for her father when he wouldn't advocate for himself, who'd embraced change with grace when her father was panicking, who saw connections and possibilities with the kind of wisdom that suggested she'd internalize not just her father's values, but her late mother's as well. When you're running the world someday, Lena said seriously, I hope you'll remember that the best leaders are the ones who never forget their human first, leader second. I'll remember. Emma's smile was bright with promise. Because I'll have examples to follow. Dad showing me that service matters more than recognition. You showing me that success and integrity don't have to be opposites. Mom, her voice caught slightly, grief still present even years later. Showing me through Dad's stories that love means sacrificing for what matters most. Daniel's arm went around Emma's shoulders, pulling her close with the protective instinct that had defined his parenting from the day Sarah died. Lena watched them, feeling profound gratitude for this unlikely family she'd been invited to join, for the friendship that had grown from crisis into something sustaining and real. That night, back in her own apartment, Lena stood at her window looking out over the city lights that had once represented territory to conquer and now represented community to serve. Cross Enterprises Tower was visible in the downtown skyline, its lights marking late-night workers pursuing projects that would shape tomorrow's market. She thought about the people in that building, security guards like Daniel had been, cleaning crew making offices pristine for morning, IT staff maintaining infrastructure, late-working executives chasing deadlines and dreams. Every one of them was living a life as complex as her own. Every one of them mattered beyond their function. A year ago, she wouldn't have thought about them at all. Today, she could not think about them. That shift in perspective, that fundamental reorientation from seeing positions to seeing people, was the real transformation Daniel Cole had sparked by refusing to let her die alone in a hallway. The scholarship applications for next year's cohort sat on her desk, waiting for review. The board meeting agenda for next month included discussion of expanding the Healing Center model to other communities. Her calendar showed coffee with Daniel next Tuesday, Emma's spring concert next week, listening sessions with facilities workers the week after. Her life looked nothing like it had a year ago. The metric she measured success by had changed completely. The person she was becoming bore little resemblance to the person she'd been. And for the first time in her entire adult life, Lena Cross felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, surrounded by people who mattered and working toward outcomes that would echo beyond quarterly reports. The journey from isolated CEO to connected human being had been difficult, painful at times, and absolutely necessary. Daniel Cole had saved her life with medical expertise that night in the hallway. But the deeper gift was teaching her, through example and challenge and consistent presence, how to actually live that life in a way that honored what mattered. She picked up her phone and sent a message to Daniel. "Thank you for everything, for then, for now, for showing me what it means to lead with heart as well as strategy." His response came quickly. "Thank you for listening, for changing, for becoming the kind of leader the world needs more of. Emma and I are lucky to know you." Lena smiled at her phone, feeling the warmth of genuine connection, the strength of friendships built through mutual care and consistent showing up. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: board politics, strategic decisions, the endless complexity of leading a major company while trying to maintain human values. But tonight, she had this: the satisfaction of a year well spent, relationships that mattered, and the certainty that she was finally measuring success by standards that would sustain her not just through the next quarter, but through the rest of her life. Outside her window, the city continued its endless rhythm, people working, resting, dreaming, struggling, succeeding, failing, trying again. All of them living complex lives that mattered, all of them deserving to be seen, recognized, valued. Lena Cross, CEO of Cross Enterprises, former workaholic who'd nearly died alone, current friend to a combat medic and his brilliant daughter, closed her eyes and made a promise to herself. She would keep choosing connection over isolation, humanity over efficiency, values over pure profit. Not because it was easy, but because Daniel Cole had shown her it was possible, and Emma Cole had shown her it was necessary, and her own transformation had shown her it was worth fighting for. That, she decided, was the truest measure of success. Not what you built, but who you became while building it, and she was finally becoming someone she could respect.